I think you just have to go into Google Docs.
Yeah, and you can use my little agenda one that I usually put my
Okay.
notes in. You can use that if you like.
Okay.
I'm just
And will you
transferring
share
it to
that in
Google.
the chat, Nicole?
Yeah, yeah. I
Okay.
just want to make sure it goes into your
That Google Drive?
that it's in Google, that it's in Docs and not Word. So that's the
Okay,
one
good. Thank you.
that I think I didn't do yet.
Okay, so officially called to order at 9:11. We're all here. Take it away. We don't have any other items on the agenda. Just need a motion to approve the agenda.
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
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 Rosie, you actually have to unmute because people can see you, so
Aye.
thank you.
Can you see me?
Yeah, we can see you.
I was laughing at Carla's enthusiasm seconding.
Yeah.
Well, you know, I was just wait. I was like, okay, I don't see anybody fighting for it this morning, so let me just go ahead and second that motion.
Kalima, I realize the 3 items you're talking about are the 3 that I put on the board agenda. So
Yes.
I did see that.
Yeah, no worries.
Seems a long time ago.
Yeah. All right. So we're here for our third closed session. I'm not closed session. Our third session around equity district. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Nicole. Thanks everyone for showing up on a Saturday morning.
Yeah, good morning. Good morning. I'm excited to hang out with you. It seemed like just yesterday that we had our last session together, and you all did a phenomenal job of wrestling with, what is your equity statement for the district, which is powerful. And as you all were closing, you all kind of talked about, what, you really took away from that session. And there were some great takeaways and a lot of non-closure, right? Because there's a lot more work to do. So what I wanted to do today is just kind of continue to bridge the work you started. I know you have a couple of timelines I want to check in on. One of them in particular, you were taking your equity statement. I think you were going to, I want to check in and see what's happened since the last meeting. Maybe you've gotten feedback from others, but also I think you wanted to update and amend your policy, your equity policy, to include the statement. And I believe that was it for that policy, but we do want to take some time today to go through that. And then also spend some time looking at going back to your priorities, right? So really thinking about your priorities in terms of your kind of 4 buckets, kind of areas that you want to look at. So you can really stay laser focused as a governance team to get those things done. So I know that you're also, as you're kind of transitioning and, things are changing, not just even with leadership, but also with like just the climate around us, right? Trying to consider reopening schools. I'm not sure where you all are at with that. As a parent, I'm just like, wow, this is amazing. I'm not sure how I feel about this, but as educators, I recognize that you all have a lot going on. And so I want to make sure today really helps you stay focused on what are those priorities that, regardless of what's going on around us, we got to really stay focused on those things that we want to, have last for beyond just this year, that you want to have system change. So that's why we want to prioritize our work. So before we start, though, I actually thought it would be great. It's Saturday. Andy's gotten his coffee. He's gone for his run. And I'm not sure if everyone else is good to go. But I do want to make sure we at least just have a chance to open up with a little bit of just team building. I think that sometimes we're in business so much that we forget about some of the things that are most important, which is us as people. And really ensuring that this work continue to be safe for you and continue to grow and build your relationships. So I'm going to do something real simple today. I'm just going to ask you to just whip around. I know everyone knows you. You're celebrities in the city, right? Because you're on Zoom like every week almost, right? But I'm going to ask that you just do something real quick, that we do a quick whip around and just share the story about your name. Okay, so what's your name? How do you pronounce it? And of course, a little story about your name. Now, this is going to be tough because I'm going to ask you to do the 1-minute version of that, like 60 seconds, right? There's the dissertation version, there's the 10-minute version, right? But I want you to do like the 60-second version of what is the history of your name, okay? So I'll start and just kind of model for you, and then we'll make some connections of why this is important later on. So my name is Nicole. My mother calls me Nico. I never quite know why she pronounces my name differently than the rest of America. It's a very common name, but she says Nicole. And what's interesting is as I unpack my ancestry and kind of think about all of the different nuances of where I'm from, beyond just even American, experiences as an African American, I realize our Creole ancestry really has a mixture of languages. And so even though she was born and raised in Vallejo, lived in California her whole life, but she still has kind of a Southern sound. And also she has this pronunciation of words that don't necessarily sound like, the average person who speaks English, standard English. So I'll make that connection because I really appreciate the journey I'm on about learning about my own ancestry beyond just America and Western, Europe and Western Africa, and just really understanding my Creole people. And so that's why she says Nicole. And so it's just interesting. Okay, now that was like less than 60 seconds, I think. So that's a record for me. So now I'm just going to whip around and ask each of you to share again your story about your name. Okay, so I'll start with Andy and I'll just whip around the screen based on how I see you all. So Andy, why don't you jump in?
Sure. Andrew from the Greek, which is, manly or brave. And that was given to me because I was a 10-pound baby. So I was a big boy, and my mom, was like 5'1". So it was basically given because of the size of me as an infant. So there you go. See, that was less than 30 seconds, I think.
Forgot I muted myself. All right, thanks, Andy. That interesting to know. Tiffany. Oh, you're on mute, Tiffany.
Are we doing first names? First names.
Yeah, first names, but I forgot to say that. If you want to go into your last name, absolutely. But it was really your first name, so I apologize.
So two things about my name, Tiffany. A super common name, not very original at all. I was born on Valentine's Day, so my mom considered naming me like Valentina, but my older sister's already name is Tina, so that went out the door, and I think she just liked Tiffany. I'm wondering if it was like related to a sitcom. But every person in my family has a name that starts with a T. So in my immediate family, there's Tina, Tiffany, and my parents are Thomas and Terry. Of course, they chose those names when they immigrated here. So they each have stories about their names. But even on my dad's side, he's 1 out of 10 brothers and sisters. And they all have names that start with T's in Vietnamese. So yeah, the kind of tradition kind of continues with us too.
Powerful. Wow. Thank you for that, Tiffany. Appreciate that. Carla, let me go to you next.
Okay, so I don't know where my origin is of my name because I guess I never asked my mom. But I will say that when I was, I was born in Hong Kong. So actually I didn't, I was little, so I don't think I remember myself as my family calling me Carla when I was young before we immigrated here. So I'll say I haven't had a different name until we came here when I was like 7 or 8. So, but yeah, I never asked my mom. I think she probably just pulled it out somewhere, like, okay, well, that's a good name. We'll just name her that, I guess. I don't know. But I guess that was something that I will have to ask her when I get off the Zoom today. So that's all I got.
All right. Yeah, it's not a bad idea. It's more storytelling. Sit with mommy and just, Mom, why Carla, right? Yeah, my mom also did not have a reason either. So that was interesting. And my dad has since passed away, so I don't know where the Nicole piece came from either. But appreciate that, Carla. Tony, what about you?
The story that I'm told, so my name's Tony Ann, and Ann's my mom's name. The story that I've heard about my name is that my parents were going to either name me Christine or Christina, and they could not agree. And so when I was born, my dad's cousin, Tony Benedetto, had just died, and they said, why don't we just name her Tony? So I think it was sort of by chance that some guy named Tony died. And so they named me that. But when I was little, I hated my name because everywhere I went, teachers and classrooms would say, "Oh, Tony, I thought you were a boy." And I would, it wasn't nice to hear that all the time. So I remember when I was a teacher, and still people's names are really important to call them by the right name, to not editorialize about their name. And I kind of learned that firsthand.
Yeah. Well said. Wow. I appreciate you sharing that. Tony, and you spell it Toni, which is interesting too. So, I appreciate that. Kalima.
Hello. So Kalima is the faith. It means faith. It is so in the Islamic tradition. Both my parents are Muslim. In order to become a Muslim, you have to say the Shahada, that's all you have to do, which is a declaration of faith. And so to declare your faith is taking the Kalima. So my whole name is a sentence. Then my mom had 4 other kids and learned that it was a mistake to have that expectation. So only my sister and only the top 2 of us have that full name as your full name is a whole sentence. But my full name means faith that grows from a strong faith in religion.
Wow, powerful. Thanks, Kalima. And I tell you, Kalima, I had a student with your same last name. So I think it's Salahuddin, right? And
it's my name is not unique at all if I go to an Arab country. So we went to Hajj, and my mind was blown. Like, when you go to Disneyland and you see your name on the little things, like I went into the store and I was like, oh my God, it's in English and it's right there. So there was Kalimas all over the place. Kalima Salahuddin's all over the place. Yeah.
Interesting. Huh. We're going to make that connection one day because that's my student. That was her family. So we'll see. All right. Thanks, Kalima. Rosie.
Good morning, everyone. So my name is Rosie. That is my given name, Rosie. It's not short for Rosemary, Rosalie. I used to get those questions forever and ever. When I was in 6th grade, we had a names project where you had to learn about your name, the origin, who named you, all this stuff. So I just innocently went home and asked my mom, who named me and why did you name me Rosie? And she was washing dishes and she just turned around and said, your father named you after his girlfriend. And so I said, really? She said, go ask your father. So I asked my dad. He goes, oh no, I just like the name. And then my mom said, oh, I saw the letters. I saw the pictures of this woman. We were in the Philippines and he was here in the United States and he was a handyman and she was a divorced lady with 2 little kids and her name was Rosie. And so I went, okay, this is a side of my dad I didn't know. But in my family, I'm called Ronnie. That's my nickname. Because when I was 10, I was diagnosed with leukemia. And one of the things they said was to drive the spirits away, change your name so they don't know you. They can't find you. So they let me choose my name. And I loved Archie comics at the time. I did not want to be called Veronica, but I liked that she was a sexy Veronica, but she had this masculine name. So I said, I want to be called Ronnie. And they was kind of rolled. They went, okay. So from now on, everyone in the family calls you Ronnie. So I am Auntie Ron. I am to the great nephews and nieces. I'm Mama Ron. If I open a restaurant, it'll be Mama Ron's. So that's around real identity is Ron.
Interesting. Yeah. Wow.
Okay, my story's boring.
I know all of our stories are like, whoa.
I know. Okay, maybe she should have went last. I'm muting now, but yeah.
Yeah, no, that's cool. Thanks, Rose. I appreciate that. Sure. I'm going to try not to call you Mama Ron, but I look forward to your restaurant. I'll go. Okay. When they let us open back up officially, right? Thank you so much. Nick.
Yeah, we have similar names.
Yes, we
So,
do.
yeah, it's a cool name. I like my name. I asked my parents. I think that they had. I think like most parents, they agreed on a name after a certain point. My dad had a couple ideas. My mom, and they never called me by my full first name is Nicholas. So like people say Nicholas, or it's on. Sometimes you get issued an email or something. It's I don't respond to it. Even as a kid, they never called me Nicholas. So I don't know why they went with I guess formally on that. So anyways, it's Nick, and Nick, like Andy's name you mentioned too, is a Greek name. Nicholas means victory of the people. I looked it up a few years ago, which is pretty cool. Nick is just like Nike. So I thought that was cool because sometimes my students ask me, what's your name? I'm like, my name is Mr. O. That's all you need to know. And we laugh about it, but like, but Nick, I says all over the classroom. It's right there. You're wearing it, and that's what it is. So the goddess of victory. So, like that. But my story is as cool as Rosie's. So, so I feel like Nick. I just like the way my name is. But that's cool, and this is a cool story.
Wow. Okay. Thanks, Nick. All right. April.
Well, my parents named me April because they liked the month. It's not as interesting as Rosie or Nick's story at all. And my middle name is Nicole. So, yeah, best name ever.
Oh, appreciate that. April, and in Espanol, I think it's Abril, right?
It is.
Every once in a while, people change our names, right, and change it to different languages too. Well, thank you so much, April. Luca, jump on in, Luca.
Good morning.
Good morning.
My name is Luca, and my name comes from a city in Italy. It's a small city in Italy. Yep, that's about it.
Okay, Luca, appreciate that. All right. Oh, powerful. And I think I didn't miss anybody. I think we got everyone. And I just appreciate you sharing to start us off this morning. When doing this type of work, sometimes we forget just who we are in this work. And sometimes something as simple as pause, think about your name starts to make you think about your story, right? Which connects to your identity, and specifically your cultural identity, right? Your belief systems, right? The way you interact with people, the way you see the world. Some of you started to talk about your.
I don't know. Is Jake listening? Jake, are you still here?
Jake, are you there? Yeah, I don't know if Jake was there. Jake's like, I just want to be in the background, huh? Leave me alone.
Nope.
Jake's like, you didn't tell me.
Probably eating breakfast or something.
Okay, cool. I didn't want to, like, if he was listening, like, we're like, Jake's not here.
Oh yeah, no, good thinking. Yeah, I just assumed he was like, I got you all set up. Now leave me alone.
Okay, cool. So he isn't. No.
But if he jumps in, we'll.
Oh, there he goes.
I'm here. Sorry.
Okay. No, we were saying if you were here, we just wanted to acknowledge that you were here, and if you wanted to share how you got your name.
I did obviously my name's from the Bible, but I'm Jacob. So it's funny while you guys were talking about it, I started looking it up. So it has to do with, I guess Jacob came out with a twin holding his heel. It was interesting, but yeah, thanks for including me.
Thank you, Jacob. I think we call you Jake, but it's Jacob. Yeah. Thank you so much. But yeah, I mean, even with that, like, Jake, looking up just kind of the history of it, right? It makes you just pause and just go back to like, why am I here? How did I get here? What is my identity? And this is important in this type of work because often we'll get caught in, like, we're going to go into the technicalities of governance and all that good stuff. But when we talk about equity focused work, it's important that the people part of the work really be acknowledged in this, because ultimately you're wanting to address equity gaps for your children and families. And a lot of the work we're going to do is deconstructing some of the systems that have actually really destroyed or diminished people's identity. And so something as simple as our names, right? There's so much to unpack behind that. And as you think about modeling even for our teachers in classrooms who are with kids every day, there are many who don't take the time to just ask kids, how did you get your name? How do you pronounce it, right? What do you want to be called? what's your identity, right? Versus what we typically do is sometimes we even look at a name and we'll make assumptions about where they're from, what language they speak, and just completely miss who they are, right? We'll miss Rosie's story, right? We would miss that if we didn't ask, right? And so those are the things that is really important as we do this work. When we start to look at your equity definition, you all spent quite a bit of time, right, unpacking that. And what's going to be really critical is that as you apply that lens to your work, you have to remember we're applying it to people and not always just systems, right, which are policies and practices, which is where governance lies, right? But we always have to remember our people portion of this, which is most critical to move this work. And remembering to deconstruct things like institutional racism requires us to dismantle the construct of race in itself, which often race actually creates division amongst people, right? It was a concept designed to divide people based on people's characteristics, right? Based on their nationality. And then we just really realized that even after you all were telling your stories, we all have something in common, right? We have more in common actually than not. And so when you break down our DNA, right? I don't know how many of you done ancestry.com and that great fun, 23andMe, and you're learning about your ancestry. But at the end of the day, we all have more in common than not, even genetically. But when we operate in the constructs of race, and then we're going to go into talking about your data, what happens? Our kids are put in those boxes, right? And what happens is we only operate in those constructs and think that that's how we address equity. And equity is about giving people what they need, right? That's the short version of it, right? Giving them what they need. But if you don't know people, we can't give them what they need. So as we do this work today, I want you to be thinking about that. And that was just kind of a warm up, but starting with you, knowing yourself, knowing your identity is really important in this work as we begin to wrestle with how do we deconstruct some of the equity gaps that exist in the school district that are systemic, right? That have been long-standing. Okay, so I really appreciate that. What I want to do is I'm going to share my screen and just share the agenda that I shared with you all. So hopefully you all got it. And I don't know, Tony, if you had planned to take notes or if anyone wants to take notes. I kind of have my own notes that I take, but I don't want you all to feel like you need those for your minutes. So feel free to use this template. And what I did is just broke it up based on what I think we'll do in terms of time frame. A lot of times we'll adjust. But notice that we kind of had three, things that we wanted to cover, and I broke them up into chunks in terms of just kind of reviewing governance, right? What effective governance is. It's important that we always revisit that. Look at prioritizing our work, and that included when you talked about the equity statement, really revisiting that, your policy, and then also doing a little bit of equity impact planning. And I call it planning, but this is the beginning phases of planning, which you actually are doing now. You're doing it kind of simultaneously. So we're gonna have those down to three chunks, but you see how I broke up the agenda based on what I really want to hit on these talking points. And then at the end, we'll spend a little bit of time talking about what you want your next study session to involve, because these study sessions are important for you to have time to really wrestle with what is it we want to do as a team. Okay. So before I jump in and get started, I wanted to kind of remind us of our 4 agreements before we jump in. And so I will also, I just have like kind of, I don't want to say old slides, but slides here that I'll reference just for you. And if you all want me to share it in your folder, I can do that as well. But these are a couple of slides you've seen before. But just remind us of our 4 agreements as we work together. I think it's really critical as you continue to advance your work in Jefferson that we not skip this step. And this step has to be about safe space for everybody to engage in the work. So remember our 4 agreements: stay engaged, experience discomfort, speak your truth, expect and accept non-closure. Very important when we talk about unpacking things like racism that can be very uncomfortable for people, very much cause quite a bit of barriers when we start to deepen the work. There will be pushback with this work. Everyone's not going to be a fan of this because you're deconstructing a system that people are used to, right? Like this is just the way we do school. And so if we start interrupting that, there is discomfort. So we want to ensure that safe space is really modeled. So as a governance team that you're showing and demonstrating this is safe space, even when we disagree with each other, even when our truths are very different. It is important though that everybody have a space to engage in this work, and that it is a journey. That non-closure is a journey. And so it's messy, right? That's uncomfortable in itself, right? It's messy. And you all really demonstrated these really well in your last meeting that I joined you on, in terms of just the ability to just experience discomfort, be okay with like we're thinking outside of the box, right? Like that's uncomfortable in itself. And to be able to say, this is what we're going to call out as equity is pretty bold. So we're going to go back to your statements definitely and look at, how we want to deepen that. But this is going to be some powerful work you do on behalf of the district. And I want to just make sure we always go back to this. So as you're going to different meetings, different spaces, make sure that safe space has been established. Because at the end of the day, if people don't feel that they can engage and they feel attacked or they feel judged because they're just not on the same journey, they don't understand, or even they may say things that are really offensive, you still have to recognize the journey that people are on, and we have to meet people where they are, right? But we also have to speak our truth and call it out when it's not okay. And so that's something you have to create, and that's really powerful, and we can't skip this step in the beginning of this type of work, or else down the road, when things get uncomfortable, you know what happens, right? It's gonna stop. This is a political space, right? There's uproar that may happen. Those are the things that we have to ensure we really get ahead of. So we want to go from safety to brave space, which is to actually do things, actions that are going to change the trajectory for kids. I do want to remind us though that safe space and discomfort are two different things. So we're going to have to always be able to remind people that when it gets uncomfortable, okay, that is very different from being unsafe. Okay, and so when we start unpacking things like privilege, right? People who have power, people who have benefited from a system, and we're calling those things out, there are going to be people who are going to not like that and not feel comfortable because it feels like an attack. So you have to be, this is where we talk about our strategy, learning more language and our awareness so that we can meet people where they are, so that people don't feel like they're pushed out and can't engage in this work. Okay, so that's really important. We'll have to keep wrestling with that as we continue to move on our journey together. So any questions, thoughts about the 4 agreements as we continue to unpack this work together? Because this is always something I don't want to skip. Questions, thoughts about our 4 agreements, and if we're still good with them. All right, everybody's good. Okay. Jump in. I thought I heard someone. Okay.
No, I'm saying still good. Thank you.
Okay, perfect. All right, excellent. So what I want to do is, let me move this out the way. What I want to do is jump right into some reflection. And I know you all have been, really on this journey together for, a bit of time, but I know also there's transition in terms of leadership, and you're really trying to kind of move forward, and you'll have obviously, in January, you'll look at your governance, you'll revisit some things, which is a very normal process for boards. So I want to just remind you, as you're going to do your equity work this year, always stay focused on ensuring that you have effective governance practices. That's going to be really critical, that you have practices that are effective, because if not, then it's going to be very difficult to do equity work. Equity work, again, is very messy. It's very unconventional. And so if we don't have effective practices, it'll be very difficult to actually see this work through. And again, the work will stop at the governance level. So some of the reminders I want to give you is when we talk about this assessment, you all have seen this. We've gone through this, if you recall. I want to say it was back in June. And this is where we actually went through, like, where are we at as a governance team? And so this is a great assessment that you could do, maybe every quarter. Obviously, CSBA has its own assessment, but I really like this one because it really comes from kind of research around the 8 characteristics of effective boards. And so we're not going to go through them all right this moment, but I do want to make sure I remind you of them. Making sure you're committed to a vision for equity. And I think you all are feeling like, yes, we're there, right? Ultimately, you want to be very effective at that, right? And so when we talk about very effective, meaning that in the end, all 5 of us are in that same place, that we're committed to this vision for equity. We have high expectations for students, okay? And there are some clear goals around that, which is part of what we're working on. Want to make sure, the second one, that you have strong shared beliefs and values about this work, right? And beliefs and values is important. This is where our personal kind of perspective comes into play, but also as a collective governance team, that this is our belief system, and that our community recognizes that this is our belief system. So even when the pushback comes, it is very clear that we have shared beliefs and values about this work, and that everyone in our system eventually starts to have that common shared value. And that you believe in the system that you're in. So like when we talk about the history of public education, one of our favorite activities, right? The reality is this, that the system wasn't designed to be equitable for all kids. And so while we know that, we still have to realize that we're the system, right? We make up the system, we create policies, we influence practices. So we have to believe that our system that we're providing for kids actually can be accessible for kids. Now all kids can learn in that system. So that's going to be really important that we believe all kids can learn. The third piece, that your board is collaborative in its relationship, not only with your staff, right, but also with the community, and that there's a communication space that happens. And I know that's something that you all are working on, is how do we ensure we have a great communication structure so that everyone's informed, everyone has the same information, there's timeliness, there's consistency, but how do you make sure there's a collaborative relationship, that you're doing this with the community and not to the community? That's important when we talk about equity-driven work. I'm going to pause for a second for those first three. Any thoughts or questions about the first three? Shared vision, shared beliefs, and collaborative relationships. Any thoughts about those three so far? And maybe even where you think you all are at. How are you doing on those?
I'll start. Just a thought. I think one of the things that we do well as a board is we do share our thoughts and input, but there are times where I think if we anticipate having a difference of opinion on certain things, that we need to start from the middle, ground that we all agree on, which I think is an effective communication tool. But I do also think that something we've learned as a nation in recent months and maybe years, that we all obviously have political ideas and different ways to approach it. And I think our board does that well. But in terms of speaking our truth and all those things, that we all take all of our perspectives together and just bring it to the table so that we can discuss those things, because certainly all of us here not only represent our own views and the people who obviously want us to be on the board and bring that to our community, but we also have a range of perspective and depth that if we always just try to mediate what we're doing, we're not going to bring our full capacity to the board and our ideas. So I think that's absolutely true, that the shared vision and understanding how to collaborate with that means being open about that. I think people appreciate that, and I think we've been doing a good job, but I just want to encourage that, continue to encourage that, that dialogue.
Good, good. Good. Thank you for that. I appreciate that perspective. All right, any other questions, thoughts? I know, Tony, what I neglected to say, part of why I also wanted to revisit this is that as the governance team, kind of transitions, I want to make sure that you had an opportunity, because this is about, governance team, board members and superintendent kind of collectively. So this is really helpful as you make that transition and really plan for your work moving forward. So if you have any questions or thoughts about this, please, share. We'll definitely revisit these as you all transition officially.
So I think that we do number one well. We get a shared vision as a board, and even including the executive cabinet. Like, there's a really good shared vision between us. And there's a level of understanding of what that shared vision is and why that shared vision is, and it completely stops with us. We don't explain it or share it or really work to make sure that the folks outside of our bubble understand it before we start making changes because of it.
It's powerful.
So I also think that we need to really define what collaboration means. That when we say we're having a collaborative effort, what does that mean? So I'm really proud of the work that we've done, Return to School. I feel like that's our first real collaborative effort that I've seen in this district, that involves students, parents, teachers, administrators, all working together on the same page. That's not a performance art. I've seen other things done where we have a budget work study. This is before Tina, because this is the first time we're going to have to do it again, where we're just pulling people in the community to discuss something that's already been decided and really just trying to get them to rubber stamp it, and I kind of feel like that's how people feel like they're voting when we have surveys and other things that go out to do that collaboration piece. It's really them voting on something that's already been decided. And we're like, pick one of the three instead of asking them to help decide or build what those three things that they're voting are in. It doesn't mean it has to be the whole district, but really having all stakeholders, students, teachers, parents, etc., and not just the same people over and over again.
There you go.
So I think that we really need to focus and define what real collaboration means, we also need to focus and define on what real communication means, because we'll say something or ask for something to be communicated, and then we'll be told it was communicated. But, if it was an email on Friday, that's not communication, so it's, I think those are two areas that I feel that we could really do more work.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, I appreciate that, Kalima. What a great example. And I just appreciate that reflection, because many boards don't think of it that way, right? We think of it as we're the governance team and we make the decisions. And, yes, you have to make executive decisions without asking questions at times. But ultimately, like, there's a culture that we want to create around collaboration with our community, which is important. We talk about empowerment of voices who haven't been heard, right? When we do equity work, we have to bring others in. So I just appreciate that. Powerful. And we will talk a little bit about communications a little later. So thank you for that. Anyone else for the first three? I was going to whip through the last ones just to kind of check in with you, just review them. And again, hopefully you can see it on your screen. You may have to blow it up on your own. I think I can't do it on my end for some reason because I'm in Google Docs or Google Slides versus the other one. I just haven't figured out how to do it evidently. But the fourth characteristics is about being accountability driven, spending less time on operational issues and more time focused on equity and policies to improve student achievement. And so this is a big one, right? Well, we hold ourselves accountable. So we're measuring and monitoring progress, right? And that is over the kind of bigger things, which we'll talk about, the bigger issues, those priorities, versus some of those micromanaging type of things. And so this is really important, especially for board members, superintendents, like that relationship. And I'll show that slide in a second. But making sure we recognize, like, we understand our roles and that we hold each other accountable. We're measuring the impact of our work, but we're not in the weeds, right? And that's what's really important is board members supposed to be at that, 30,000 foot level. And when we start getting in the weeds of, the nuances, it becomes tricky. And I will say this though, every board has its own culture. So we have to recognize what that means. And my example is I managed a school board members campaign a couple years ago, and he won, but he's a 35-year, educator in the same district where he won. And so he knows everything about everything, right? He knows every aspect of the school district. He knows everyone. And this was a real challenge for him because in the end, what he had to do is start recognizing his role. And his role was simply that you're governing now, right? Like he used to be a substitute principal, for example, right? So he wants to go jump in the schools, and he actually does. He has a culture he's created, and people like it. But he goes to schools every week, right? He brings a city councilman with him, and he's in classrooms, and he has a different lens. And so for the superintendent, that had to be a relationship and understanding, because if not, that becomes very uncomfortable. It becomes kind of invasive, and it becomes something that it causes confusion, right? Where teachers are like, why is that board member here, right? And so without collaboration and communication in number three, and number four, it's important. Accountability is important. That yes, board members should know what's going on at schools, right? Like that makes a lot of sense. And not that you don't trust your superintendent in terms of reports and your staff in terms of reports, but you have a pulse on what's going on in the school district. But that has to be something that's very clearly understood. But it's not about coming back and doing your board report and saying, I noticed I went in this one classroom and there was a water fountain that was dripping, and I just noticed it was dripping and dripping, and I need to get the maintenance person to come. That's like getting in the weeds, right? And that's not really our role. Our role is about really looking at the priorities, teaching and learning. And maybe that water fountain, if that is impacting learning, then yes, you may want to check in with your superintendent. But we don't micromanage, and we just stay in that space of holding the people accountable, but we also want to make sure we're not in the weeds. So that's really where that one comes from. The fifth one is around being data savvy. So we definitely got to talk about that, being data savvy, using actual data to drive your governance, using data to ask questions of the staff. And when I say data, good data, right? So both qualitative and quantitative. So that's going to be important this year, that we not just look at the dashboard or that your typical metrics for achievement, which are important, but they aren't the only metrics to define student success. So having multiple data points is going to be important. And this is going to be something you have to work on as a team, because superintendent and designees, district staff, have to be a part of providing that data for you. So you're going to have to really understand that piece around how do we have a culture around using data to drive our work and really measuring the progress so that we can have continuous improvement, right? But that requires us to use data and ask those questions as governance team members. Aligning your board, aligning and monitoring and sustaining your resources, I should say. So this is where you oversee the budget, right? You oversee kind of human capital, you oversee even time, right? Around the calendar, what happens professionally for people when they're learning. So resources is important, right? That it's aligned and that you actually monitor. So you have the LCAP, which is a tool to help you with allocating your budget, but you have to make sure we're measuring and monitoring that. And you're also sustaining the things that impact your students, right? So there's going to be some decisions you'll have to make around your budget and your resources to make sure you're addressing equity. So this is a really important one. And the example that was pulled out is your professional learning. You spend, 85, 90% of your budget on human capital. And so it's very important that human capital, those people in the system are able to grow, especially in this type of work. If professional development is not something that's focused on, it's going to be hard to expect change. It's going to be hard to expect capacity to be built without putting time and resources to professional learning. And this is not always about like hiring people to come from the outside, by the way. This is about collaboration. You have some experts who already work in your district, right? They're called teachers. They've been doing this for a while. And there are some teachers who actually are equity leaders who actually can be a part of that leadership. And so having that capacity for them to collaborate and be able to lead their own kind of PD is really important piece of this work. So that requires you to allocate time for them to do that, right? So I'm going to pause for a second. I went through accountability, data savviness, and resources. Questions, thoughts about those three? Maybe even how you think you're doing on those or questions you may have. Yes, Tony, I'll share the slides, by the way.
This is where I think rather than using, the non-effective, somewhat effective type of breakdown, this is the area of growth. These are the growth opportunities for us because we've started to do some of this work. Now it's really how do we take this to the next level in terms of the way we read the data. This is, how do we ask questions for different kinds of data, right? How do we continue to learn using the example you shared to continue to stay in our lane, and to really govern from that high level, and developing the trust with the superintendent as well, right? So these are the areas. This is all. I think what's encouraging to me is that we're already well on our way in this journey, especially with the steps we've had with you, and and the work that we've been doing. And when you go back to the first three items, it's clear we have the solid base. Now it's really about elevating how we do the work. Absolutely. Which is why we're here this morning.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and it's exciting to hear you say, like, we're on our way. We have this foundation, we're moving this way. We just got to take it deeper, but that's powerful to hear. And Tony should be really exciting to hear because every board can't say that, by the way. All right, good. Anyone else on those three before we move to the last two, and then we're going to jump into our prioritization of our work.
Yeah, I think for me with the data, I mean, it's one thing to be data savvy, but also, being able to question the collection of data.
Yeah.
How is it collected? Is it really representative? And that's been the thing I feel we've struggled with since we've been on the board, and it's gotten better. But sometimes, surveys only give you so much. And I know that we follow up with the different groups as much as we can. But, so if we see that some things are skewed a certain way, at least we can identify it and question it. We have that capacity. But the collection of data for me is still, it needs to be improved.
Yeah.
Well, and then also if we have the data, like, are we just doing it just to do it? Or are we actually, we don't want to waste people's time. And are we actually really listening to what the surveys have to say? And are we actually doing something about it, right? Because that's the whole point of doing a survey is you want to hear, get the voice, so then we can say, okay, we're going in the right direction. This is not what everybody wants, and try to implement those changes.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. Yeah, I love this discussion. It was one of the things that we definitely have to talk about is, again, go back to role.
Nicole, 1 second. Go ahead, Luca.
Oh, go ahead, Luca. Sorry.
Yeah. So this is for our school, as in like the teachers and the staff members and the board members, right? Of the way that we can present a reasonable and equal viewpoints and stuff like that towards the students. So this is
question
from the board meeting and the staff members towards the students, right?
Yeah, I think so. I think it's a great question, Luca. I think the data, it's a lot of reasons why we use data, but specifically it's about addressing the needs of students. Absolutely. But there's, go ahead.
And we're trying to provide equity from the board to the students, but most of the times the students do need to rewire their thinking a little bit because they're taught things when they're younger that probably shouldn't have been taught to them. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm, absolutely.
That it's like, while we're focusing on how to provide for the students, we should also focus on how to, I'm not trying to say like change the students, but rewire the thinking, because most of them, some of them, they're taught things that probably shouldn't have been normalized for them.
Yeah, well said. Yeah, you know, Luca, that's a really powerful, profound statement. And I think when we talk about this data, this is where we talk about qualitative data, right? So not just about test scores and how kids are doing on homework and grading, but it's about how kids are learning, right? And so if we observe one of your classrooms, Luca, and we collected data around observation, and we saw the interaction of students, right? We saw some of the responses of students. And literally, I know you all are at the high school level, but what's interesting, Lucas, this is where we talk about why the elementary kids actually need to really have culturally relevant instruction right at early ages, because you're right, they're taught things at early ages. This is where implicit bias is taught. This is where we're just taught, this is how we do school. And even going back to our identity, right? Students' identity is often taught and solidified early on, and education system sometimes kind of creates that for them, right? It defines it for them. And so the data shows, and so we do have to collect data around student behavior, right? And what do we need to do to involve students in this process too? Because kids have to be a part of the change. So I just really appreciate that. And look forward to your insight on what kind of data we want to collect, because that's the hard part, right? Is what questions do we ask so that we actually know what's going on and be able to inform our work.
So I know there's like all drafting and something like that, but if you would try to change the way the students learned, would you start with elementary, or would you progress up towards the high school level? Because I know that the high school and middle schoolers, if you're starting at elementary, they've already been taught these things, and they've already been put into the wiring that they've been taught in elementary. So if you start at elementary, you still have 7 grades that have already been taught these things and need to be rewired and reset throughout from what they've been taught when they were younger.
Yeah, it's a complex one, Luca. I think systemically, if we did it right, we would start with our TKers, right, or what do you call it, kindergarten, first grade, because that's where kids' development really starts, and they're super spongy, right? They learn really quickly. But I will say this: the reality is that the maturity at middle and high school actually is where kids actually have a sense of understanding the world, and that there's some logic and cognitive processes that based on the brain development, that absolutely middle and high school is an appropriate place, because this is where you make decisions on your own, right? You're able to think for yourself. Your parents, although you're raised by your parents, you're raised by your family, you have a sense of independence. And so this is why this work is really important, even at elementary and high school. So there's the data we got to collect on that. I think we can't assume that all kids have the same understanding, have the same problems that others, but I definitely say this is why we collect data, and the board needs to know this, right? So that the board can make decisions to impact it. This is where that conversation about ethnic studies comes in, right? Why did that come up? Because kids need to be exposed to understanding multiple cultures, not just one dimensional. Which has often been the reason why we're having these discussions now, right? Is that we haven't allowed kids to explore different ethnicities and understand identity for all children.
So this
I will add to that, Luca, to your point, that that's why it's not enough for us to do it. That's why I've been really happy that all of our feeder districts, except for 2, are also participating in this same type of training. And 2 are currently working with Nicole to have similar sessions set up. And our district that we get most of our students from, which is, Jefferson Elementary, joined with us in the resolution and call for ethnic studies. So that we're all on the same page, right? It's not helpful to start this work in high school for students. That's a heavy load to lift. So that's why, one of the reasons why I started the Equity Network was so that, especially for our district, that we can ensure that all of us are on the same page and pushing towards the same direction, to your point. So that work is also happening in some of our feeder districts, and hopefully all of them in the near future.
I have one question.
Mhm.
This, I'm gonna give you. I'm not. I don't think of it as a question, but it's an idea. What if I was able to start a club at the school and provide the information that is being given from here, and also provide the information that is on this chart and the data that you're trying to enforce? If I was able to provide that directly to the high school students within my last year of high school, if I was to do that.
That would be perfect. And, that's one of the reasons why we have you as a student trustee. And I'm hoping that all of the student trustees are doing what you're thinking about doing, and not just keeping the information that you learn here with yourself, but sharing it with other students. Absolutely.
Because you guys are going to focus on the much younger group, and that's where it starts at, right? That's the main focus for the ethnic studies and the change for the little ones. But if it's kind of harder for the high school students to learn from the school boards and the this type of thing, because they're all stuck in their own little ways, I'm not trying to like say nothing like, but if it was from a student to student, you think they would be more open?
Yep.
Mhm.
Mhm.
Yeah, that's all I had to say.
Yeah, that's powerful.
Thank you.
Gosh. Woo. That's deep, Luca. We appreciate that, because this is the work. Is the kids definitely have to be a part of the change, right? And this is why we kind of do this work, and have hope for the future, because us adults have a harder time changing, right? Because we get set in our ways, but students have a whole different trajectory. A lot you haven't learned, which is great. Those kind of negative things that are taught early. So this is really exciting. We'll definitely look at some key actions where students can be involved as you start your action planning. I think this is a great one. So everyone, do not forget what Luca's idea is, because that's absolutely a great way to leverage student leadership to move this work. Powerful. So the last 2 things were about leading.
1 second, Tiffany, are you trying to say something?
Oh yeah, I was gonna.
Sorry.
Oh, no worries. I think to Luca's point too about how the wiring and the conditioning starts in the elementary school. So Circle Up does a lot of work with Jefferson Elementary School District, and training the teachers on how to rewire their thinking, and then also how to facilitate practices and circles and community building in the classroom too. So, students are having the chance to check their assumptions and look at their biases, as they're kind of like moving on in life. And I think, yeah, we should definitely talk, Luca, because I've been working with some of the sites and creating like school climate committees and things. And I think it is more effective if it's more peer led in terms of like these conversations and dialogues and discussions, because they are really deep and really personal. Yeah, that's all I'm gonna say.
Oh yeah, for sure. I need to write that down.
Perfect. Thanks, Tiffany. And I apologize, I didn't see. I had to open up my screen to see everybody. So I'm happy that you jumped in. Thank you. That's powerful. Wow, that's exciting. So the last 2 pieces of this is just to reflect on working as a united team, obviously with the superintendent, and each respectively understanding their roles. And so we'll talk about that in a second, but there's this trust and actually strong kind of equity focus together, right? The collaboration is really important. And that's why I go back to that safe space conversation. That trust in this work, working as a united team, is important. And that's why it is one of the characteristics of effective boards. So we got to make sure we remember that. And then the other piece, number 8, is working together, which you all do a phenomenal job of working together to do professional learning, really focusing your training, spending the time on a Saturday, right? Actually unpacking this work is important. And that's something that's ongoingly needed for governance teams to build capacity. Many teams just do a few study sessions a year, right, on some of the big things that happen. You know, maybe there's a budget study session. Obviously, you do one around superintendent goals, like some of those structural things that just happen. But this type of work requires constant learning. You know, the conversation that Luca just brought up, like that's a study session in itself, right? Of how do we utilize our students to actually lead this work, right? That's a big piece. So having ongoing professional learning is really important together so that you can continue to commit to this work ongoingly. This is where I call it creating a culture, right, of doing this work. So the last 2, how do we feel about that as a team? We feel like we're doing a pretty good job, united, we collaborate, we learn together. Okay, good. All right. Excellent. And so again, I encourage you, like about once a quarter, I want to say once a quarter, go back to this, you know, make sure you're still on the same. This is our pulse check, okay, as a governance team, our pulse check. And those last 3 things at the bottom is what we're actually going to go through today. So having an equity statement. So obviously you've gone through that process. We'll talk about that in a second. Having an equity policy, you've gone through that process and you're going to continue to evolve that and use that as a lens to drive your work. And then having an equity plan, right? So how do we actually do this work? Making sure we're holding ourselves accountable to the future in terms of making this work happen, focus, monitor, measure, so that we actually can close equity gaps. So those 3 things are actually going to be what we're going to cover actually today, okay? In terms of, let's see, in terms of roles, I gave you the link of the slides here, so I'm not going to go through each of them, but I want to just remind you, this is a good one to go back to as well, in that every quarter, just go back and through and say, you know, how are we doing? And remember, there's that dotted line. Superintendent and board work together. And sometimes you do cross each other's lanes at times. That's very normal, but you want to make sure you create that culture that works for you. How you communicate, right? What works best in terms of board members communicating, right? How often do you want your information? How soon do you need your packet, right? Those are all things that just kind of come into building a culture and a relationship. But remembering very clearly, there are distinctive roles between superintendents and governance teams. Superintendents include the designee, right? So that's cabinet members as well. But the board has its role, and this is something I talked about earlier, right? You're the visionaries, you adopt the policies, you monitor the process, but then the work actually happens at the ground level with your superintendents. And so this is why it's important when we talk about prioritizing our work, that we don't have 1,000 things that happen, right? In terms of like our policies and what we create, because what the work has to actually be done with the staff. It doesn't happen with the board. So we want to make sure we're really clear on who does what, right? Who's collecting that data, right? Who's the person that's doing that? Those things have to really be understood in terms of visionary and then who implements the work, okay? So this is always a good slide just to remind you of. And then this slide is embedded in here too. I'm not going to go deep into it, but these are all things that are just good to remind us along the way. Like, are we being transparent, right? Are we being responsive, right? Those are important things. These are some of the more technical things to think about. Like, what does it actually look like, right? Being responsive to our community, right? Timely communication, collaboration. When there's a problem, we actually respond. Ensuring that we're inclusive. Like, those are all like kind of some of the things to consider. So I'm not going to go deep into that, but just want to remind us of effective governance is super important when we're talking about doing equity-driven work, okay? Questions or thoughts about that piece before we get ready to jump into our next prioritizing our work in our equity statement? All right, do we need like a 5-minute stretch break? Because we've been on about an hour. And Zoom exhaustion is more real on Saturday than Monday through Friday, right? All right, let's do 5 minutes, okay? 5 minutes. Then we'll come back. It is what time now? It is 10:06, so about 10:11, okay? We come back, but just get something to drink, go to the restroom, just a 5-minute recess, if that's all right. Board President, with your permission. All right.
That sounds good, thank you.
Okay, all right, see you in 5 minutes. All right, we all coming back closely to the computer. Hopefully we got stretching and water and check in with the children who hopefully aren't tearing up the house. All right.
No comment.
Actually, mine are asleep still, but they're supposed to be up because they got in a little bit of trouble yesterday. So that husband's like, "Oh, you guys are getting up, you're cleaning up, and we're so."
Well, my daughter's teaching a class in the kitchen.
Oh.
A dance class to like 3 and 4-year-olds.
Oh, wow. Oh, well, we got a few more hours together, less than 2. So we want to just jump in and roll our sleeves up. Want to just check in. Looks like Tiffany, you're doing notes there. So you all are good. Just checking in. We got everything we needed. Okay, perfect.
April, I can take turns though.
Yeah, thank you. I was taking notes and finding that I wasn't able to really actually participate very well. So
Right.
April offered to help me.
Yeah, no,
Collaborative.
Good. Yeah, and you'll be able to pull it all together. I think also you have your recordings. A lot of times I go back to my recording to make sure I didn't get what we talked about. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually shift and transition into our priorities and just talking about the priorities of the board. And so I want to do that through kind of revisiting what you all did at your last session, right? So you all had some conversations, obviously. You started with just your equity statement, right? And so we want to definitely revisit that. I do want to ask where you are in that process, also where you are in amending your policy. And then I want to unpack those 4 priorities that you created in your framework, if that's okay. And so I'm going to go ahead and share the notes from last time. I think you all have these. You all shared these with me, so I'm assuming you still have them. So you remember these here? So this is when you wrestle with your statement. So you had these 3 statements and you were kind of wordsmithing, kind of wrestling with doing the whole elephant and blind man process, right? Like, no, it means this, it means this. And so I just want to pause and just see where you are in the process of developing your equity statement.
So Nicole, my understanding, I looked at the notes actually yesterday and it said that Terry and I were going to work on it, but my understanding at the end of the last session is that we decided to kind of relook at it again together. So I know I have not personally worked on it since that day.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I listened to the video again too yesterday just to make sure I didn't miss anything else. And I believe at the end you were going to table it and wait to come back today. But I do want to ask, did anyone else, in between have discussions with people, try to get input, anything like that between the last time we were together in September with regards to your statement?
So I did talk to Tony. We did talk. So that we needed to add an element in here that reflected the LGBTQIA+ community.
Mm-hmm.
And I went back and looked at it. So I think the part for me that kind of stands out is that we say political, economic, and racial inequities. So either we add something in there or we just remove social, political, economic, and racial and just say systemic inequities in all areas. So in all areas, because there are a lot of inequities that we need to address, and I don't want to limit them to these few because there's other things that are out there that are also affecting our students' educational process. So, and then really, but in our policy, we do call out gender and LGBTQI issues. So
you do.
So that's why I was thinking maybe just remove those words and change it to confront and dismantle systemic inequities.
You're right. Lucky you have a much better recall memory than I do, Colleen. I do remember talking to you. It's been a week. Can you tell? So what I'm wondering, should we maybe just cut and paste this statement into the new notes and make amendments? What do you think?
Yeah, I was thinking that too. I just wanted, before I did that, I wanted
Yeah.
to before. So let me copy that for you all right in here.
And I think the one that did we end up working really with statement, was it statement 3 that encompassed everything? Yeah.
Yeah.
Good. Thanks.
Yeah, and that's what I wanted to check in too, because I know you all were working from that document, and I was actually, I could see it at times. I was on my phone, so I could see it and I couldn't. So I just want to make sure. So now it's in there, so you all can wordsmith as we're having our discussion. So, so Kalima mentioned about, and I think, were you on statement 3, Kalima, when you mentioned that?
Yeah, statement 3, which is, I believe, to me has always been, that's the statement that we're working with. And I like the statement as is, except that I felt like it didn't reflect LGBTQIA plus issues. So I was like, how do we put it in there? And then I was like, and the reason why it's coming up is just because we call out social, political, economic, and racial. But then I'm thinking about it more. I'm like, there are gender inequities, like there are all kind of other inequities that are not encompassed in just those, that I felt like we're gonna leave something out if we try to list every single one.
Yep.
So let's just not list them, because we do want to interrupt all systemic inequities.
Right. So one word that people use is social cultural, like together. It's like social dash cultural, which is kind of encompasses all of those. Remember those bubbles I would have you look at, like all of those kind of ways that we discriminate against people, gender is included, age is included. Yeah. But I want to make sure that you all just really are critical about it'll be, I guess, once you've identified what are your key equity gaps you want to close, then I think this will make more sense, because your statement is about what lens you place on the work you're doing. So if you're calling out LGBTQ, for example, then there's probably going to be some data that you plan on addressing that really speaks to, hey, when our equity state, what does it look like when we reach equity based on what our statement is? So I think you're going to have to call out the things that you really feel. And I think you did that in that first piece where you talked about racial inequities, like you're calling out ethnicity, right? So racial and ethnic inequities. I think those are going to be important to call out, because if not, then you become very general, and then it's tough to really say, like, we close this gap. So I remember us kind of having that discussion about what do you want to call out. But I also like your idea, Kalima, about let's call out, systemic inequities, because there's a lot of them, right? There are a lot of them. And as we collect data, we may find some things that we didn't know about, right? So I like that idea, though. I just wanted to bring that out. But
so I definitely want to hear others' ideas. I've sort of flip-flopped in my thinking a little bit, because I wonder if we don't call certain specific things out, if it just becomes an amorphous sort of a statement. And so I almost think actually that we maybe should just add. So I hear your point, Kalima, that we're not going to get everything in there probably if we list them all out, but I wonder if I kind of think maybe we should call some out and just add LGBTQI, I think if we don't call them out, then it just becomes a general statement that's harder to kind of measure our progress by. I don't know.
Because to me, the statement doesn't have to be, the focus is called out in the board goals.
Kind of like a board policy versus administrative regulations.
Right. So
Okay.
and that it frees us up to where we can shift to where if the data is showing that there's gaps and inequity in a certain area that's not listed in our policy, it relies heavily on data and, and where our district is at any given time.
Yeah.
So there may be something that shows that the data, that there's a gender inequity gap and that we need to shift and focus on gender. Right now, the data is showing us quite, and has been showing us for a while, that there is racial inequity. But I feel like that is compounded if you are a person of color who is also identifies in the LGBTQIA community. you know, it's, or if you're a person of color who is also a woman or a male, like they each come with different things. So I feel like I want to capture all of the whole person and not just a part of the person. But Nick,
Yeah.
go ahead, you raised your hand. Sorry.
I, 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 I understand what you're saying, Kalima. But I'm sort of looking at this, from, when we're educating our community perspective, because sometimes when people hear the word equity or inequity, they don't understand exactly what that means. So actually defining what it is and stating it, I think is important. And the other piece to that is I also see this statement as sort of a living statement, meaning that we can add, if there's a new type of inequity that we are unaware of, as you were saying, we can always add that to it as well. I think by adding gender inequity right now, I think we should. But there may be something else that we don't even know about, that may pop up, and we can edit the statement as appropriate at some point down the road as well. But I do think that as it is, I like the statement with that and adding the additional description.
I think April had her hand up.
I just wanted to say that as a lesbian, it's always really important to me to feel like me and my family are seen. And I think calling it out is really important, even if that means later on having to add to it. So it's my 2 cents.
Maybe there's a way to name out not the bigger ones, but like the ones that you just named, Kalima, that we know for sure are challenges, and naming the intersections of those identities. Because I think if we don't name it, we can fall under the equality versus equity, like it almost being like every identity is really important when we know that racism is at the root of a lot of it, and it's compounded by gender and sexual orientation and socioeconomic status. But maybe we name the main ones and the intersections, and then it could be a living document too.
Sure. Nick had his hand up. Go ahead, Nick.
Yeah, thank you. I think to echo and kind of, clarify what we're talking about too. I mean, this statement, we have multiple statements on equity, right? Our statement here, a policy, whatnot, but I do think it's important to sync them up in a way that, like you were saying, Kalima, and as well as Andy and Tiffany and April, naming those things is important. We could go into restating the affirmative action clause and really just going to race, class, gender, LGBTQI, gender identity, or sexual preference. Talk about inclusivity. You have to think about ability, right? Immigration or citizenship status, age, creed. There are all those things, and there's the important reason to name all of them. It can be a kind of exhaustive list. It might seem that way, but I do think there's a reason for that, and I think it can be grounded in our policy and in our statement here in a way that doesn't take too much away from it. I think it does build into it, and we can always add and edit as we go along. But just to echo that, I think it's worthwhile doing.
Yeah. And the reason why because normally I'm all about, no, quit racing, you have to say race, you have to say, but the reason why why I'm comfortable kind of leaving it out here is because we're saying we're committed to, with special attention to, underserved, inadequately served, disenfranchised by educational systems. So that's the way that I can make the argument that this is not equality, right? Because we're focusing on those that are historically underserved and inadequately served. So if you're trying to come to me with an argument that our equity statement is saying it needs to be equality for all, then you need to prove to me that the group that you're advocating for falls in line with that bottom part of the statement. And I think that makes it very hard for somebody to say or make the equality argument by us not calling out specific parts. Because as Nick also brought up, immigration, I mean, there's so many things that I was thinking about that are really, really important and impactful to a large portion of our students that is not particularly tied to race, and it may be a more cultural thing. And I don't want anybody to feel unheard or unseen because we just didn't call them out in the few things that we list, that everybody feels that everybody that falls in one of these groups that's underserved or inadequately served feels like we're talking about them.
Yeah, that's well said. I appreciate that, Kalima, because I think once you all collect data, right, this is going to evolve even more because there's some unknowns, right? There are people we don't identify because they don't show up in a box, right? A census box or some demographic box. That again, this is part of what they call dominant culture, right? Like this is what keeps us in these constraints of putting people in boxes, right? And so I think that you want to be general to catch kind of all, because there are people who will feel invisible, that you don't have a name for what they identify as, right? And I think that's important as well. But I also want to say, you have to be intentional about what system you're trying to dismantle. And the reality is when you do the history of public education, history is around a couple of things, right? The system was designed for who? And so it's around ethnicity, right? It's around socioeconomic status, right? And it's actually around gender too, if you want to break it down. And then you can break down religion as well, right? Like that's what education was built for. So if you don't recognize the structure you're dismantling, what'll happen is over time, you'll kind of forget and it'll start to go back to, okay, again, talking about language, right? Again, language, it was about dominant standard English, right? So you want to make sure you stay laser focused on what you're trying to address, so that when you measure the impact of your work, you're really intentionally measuring the impact of dismantling the system. But I want to say this, your policy actually calls out students, right? And I think it's important you do recognize your policy calls it out, but your statement is like the lens by which you're doing your work, right? So your statement is going to be that lens by which you make decisions. So you do want to make sure you're calling out those systemic inequities, which have gotten us to a place of disenfranchising a whole lot of people, right? But the history of it is based on some real constructs that have to be addressed. And racism is a big piece of it. So I think you got to call out racism, because if you don't, you'll be kind of spinning around in a circle, like, which is what we always do, because we've been taught to not talk about race, right? And we've been taught that's uncomfortable. I'm going to just for your visual, I'm going to pull up your board policy just so you can see the language that you use there, because that might help you also based on what you called out. Let me just pull it up real quick.
And just really quickly, good morning, Mustafa. Thanks for
I pulled up the wrong one. Sorry. Let me go back. Wrong one. It was this one. There it is. Oh, I think I went too fast. There it is. See how you call that out? And this is more, you called out more about how you'll govern. So this is more like what you'll do, right? Like we'll make decisions with deliberate awareness of the impediments. I just want you to see some of the wording you use here.
Pretty succinct.
Yeah, so your policy is pretty explicit, right? It's pretty explicit. And so I think your statement is really that, that I want to say that shorter version, right? So you want something you can remember, right? Like a Kalima, I love what you said is I want to make sure when I'm having a discussion with somebody that we can distinguish the difference between equity and equality, and that it really calls it out. But you also, for your statement, you don't want it to become another like larger version of your policy where all of a sudden you can't even remember what it is. But also you want to make sure it's the lens by which you apply to your practices. So your policy is pretty extensive and it calls some things out.
Yeah, and even looking at the policy, like thinking about it now, I'm like, we need to add foster, because foster students fall through the cracks. I mean, we just don't serve our foster students. I think there needs to be a call out here that we're talking about students of color, but I think in our policy, we also need to really add our students who are from, indigenous background, because we really, that's a whole other area that we really do a poor job in terms of.
There's one piece you called out, I think, which is breaks
If
down
you say
students of color.
indigent, I mean, it's yeah, it's an interesting term. Like yeah, we should change it instead of, because I'm calling out because what Tony put in the chat that we should, and that's not indigenous. We should just change that terminology to something else. But I'm talking about they are indigenous students from indigenous background. I think that's different. That's another thing that needs to highlight it out. Use another call out on top of race. That's just another added level. So to me, the policy is the place to play and to move, shift, and constantly adjust and add. But the statement is more of a frame of mind.
Yep. And the part why I brought this up is your policy starts to call out like more details as well. So I wanted to make sure you all kind of saw that, like, this is our lens by how we govern, right? Your equity statement is really for your entire district, right? Like, this is the lens that as principal, my equity statement is what drives my work as a principal, right? As a parent, I recognize equity in Jefferson Union High School District. This is what it looks like. The policy is how you govern. So I want you to remember like the purpose of these two things, right? And the statement is really a broader sense of a lens of how we do work in all aspects. So it's not just going to be governance, right? It's going to be teaching and learning, right? What does equity look like? And that's why it's important to really wrestle with, what do you want that to say? So what I'll do is I'll put back your statement up on the screen. Oops, wrong one. There we go. So I'll let you all continue to wrestle with how you want to move forward with your statement, and then we'll actually you're kind of doing your policy conversation at the same time, which is part of what was the purpose today. But once we finish this piece and you decide kind of what direction you want to move, we'll talk about some of your priorities that you actually want to address. So I want to just kind of get your thoughts on where are you at in your statement? Do you feel like you need more time to evolve this? I know I have notes that you wanted to amend your policy on October 6th, which is next week. So I wasn't sure about even that timeline, but just want to kind of get your sense of where you all are at. Again, this is not a rush, but it definitely is obviously a priority in figuring out how you want to plan your work moving forward.
I think we can knock this out today. I'm hoping that we can get this approved on.
You're like, get it done.
Yeah.
Kalima, I didn't hear you. I'm sorry. What'd you say?
I said I'm hoping that we can get this approved. That we could add this, amend the agenda for October 6th today, so that we can get this approved. Because we're also discussing not doing the pledge at the next meeting, so I would like to have this policy so I can use it as the reason why we're not doing the pledge.
So this is a quick question or suggestion. Do we want to sync up the language, not obviously completely, but at least the kind of affirmative action clause, what we're kind of identifying that we were discussing just earlier in our statement, matched up with our policy? And even like we're looking at our policy, some of the language of the word indigent, like changing that and making sure those things are aligned, but clear.
So what suggestions, I mean, can you make suggest the changes that you what are particular suggestions of changes that you want to make?
Sure. I've pulled the policy since we're on the statement, but I would say the part of the policy that talks about with respect to, race, class, gender, or gender identity, citizenship status. I'm not sure if that was there. You said foster, youth, age, creed, ability, right? Some of those, if we just zero in on those words, I think, and there's probably about 5 or 10 of them, right, at least, then that would be one of the things I think we could just start with. So it's, yeah.
So sorry, may I jump in?
Yes, please.
So I'm sort of writing things in the chat. I definitely think that the policy needs to be amended because I think I don't agree with lumping in the word indigent connected to racial and ethnic groups. It sort of implies that they go together. Anyway, so I do think we need to amend the policy, but I wonder if we should remain, I think we should maybe remain focused first on this statement or do one or the other, right? Like, so should we focus on the statement and get that what we want it to be? Or should we spend more time on the policy first because the statement will flow from the policy and we want to make sure that the policy is included on the board agenda. So I'm just sort of wanting to make sure we're focused on what we want to make sure gets done today.
So I have just something to think about. I know, Kalima, you mentioned like, I want to get this done. We have some things that we really need to move forward on. But I do want to challenge you all to think about one piece, which is
involvement. Never mind.
Equity.
I said we do need to get stakeholder feedback from this. So
yes, that's what I was thinking. You read my mind. Is that you have your statement. And I look at this as a draft, right? But you also want to remember that you have, and I'm just going to remind you of this piece here, this particular image, which you all have seen before, right? Like what's going to happen is that you're creating equity as your statement, and equity is like the elephant. Remember this conversation. And so what's going to happen is, although as a governance team, you're all coming together and you're all kind of doing this elephant blind man thing, right? You're all kind of coming up with your perspective and you're sharing so that we're all kind of have the same understanding. But what's also going to happen is that your stakeholders, your students, right, who are on the line now, so we can even ask them, they may have some different thoughts about it. People who are called out. April had called out like my own personal identity. This is how I think it should be seen. So if you think about each stakeholder, your students, your teachers, your parents, right? Those have not all been a part of this process. So I want to just caution you about before you approve it, you probably do want to get some additional input. But I also want you to feel, like it's a draft. And I think Andy said it's a living document, right? Like it can be adjusted because this is something you own, right? This is the lens that you want to apply to your work. So I just want to remind you of that as you think about, although October 6th is an important date, maybe it's something to think about. What do we need to do in terms of who else needs to be a part of this process to ensure that we have a perspective that really the community agrees with and gets behind, so that when Kalima, like you mentioned, I want to be able to, back up my argument about why we're doing this work. And when you mentioned about, the difference between equity and equality, well, even that person or people who you're having that debate with, did they give input on it? Like that is part of the process. So I think it's important that you make sure you have more feedback than just the governance team, if that makes sense.
Rosie, it's really hard for me to see when you raise your hand that way. If you could raise your hand, could you use the
chat?
Yeah. Or the
participants. Okay.
Or just jump in. Just unmute your mic and jump in. Okay. Small number of us.
So yeah, I think so for if we're thinking about October 6th, we could even, gosh, it's not agendized, but could we even say, just as a comment during discussion, that we're working really hard on an equity statement, and that we are, and I mean, to the point about the pledge, that we're working really hard on an equity statement and probably redrafting our equity policy, and that we'll be bringing that to the stakeholders for feedback. I mean, that could be instead of, I know it'd be nice to have something to present, but we don't rush. This is not, equity cannot be rushed. And as with all the comments that are here, there's so much to think about, and it's way too important, So I think if we can even just mention it, that this is why the Pledge of Allegiance can be problematic for us. And because this is the other work, this is the important work that we're doing right now. And we need stakeholder feedback.
So is the statement like the so I'm just kind of using analogy. Is the statement like the cover letter to the board policy, or the statement is the statement and then the board policy is the board policy? Like, is it like, this is what it is, and then in detail, the board policy defines what our equity statement is? So then, you know, if we're just doing an equity statement, obviously it's just, I would think that it's a little bit broader, but it's more inclusive, and then we can be more detailed in the board policy to be more inclusive.
Exactly.
If we're going to try to separate it that way, right? Because you don't have to, because if we're going to define everything in the board policy, then we don't necessarily have to have everything that's on the board policy and try to fit it into the statement.
Right.
So, you know, I guess it just depends on how we're looking at it. So although the statement is the statement, because this is how we're standing our ground, and this is our foundation, and this is what we stand for.
Yeah, it's a great question. Just to clarify, so statements are your belief system, right? It's like your declaration. This is what we believe. We believe, and you're literally, it's a definition is what it is, right? You are giving a very clear understanding of what equity means in Jefferson. I think that's really important. And it is more of the briefer version, right? Your policy, just like any other policy, is your blueprint for how you govern, right? So you want to remember that that statement is something that I almost look at it as like it becomes our mission statement in the long run, right? Like that's what it eventually becomes. We believe this, and you call out what it is, and you don't almost call out what it looks like, right? When you see it in place. But your policy is more in the details, like you said, Carla. It's more of the details. It really is a guide for how you govern. And remember, your policy calls out other policies that you have, right? And other references. And so that's more of the detail. And I think that you want to be really clear with that statement. Your definition is to make sure everyone has a common understanding of what this is, right?
So I'm thinking like, just, I mean, because like where everybody's kind of going back and forth, if we were going to like, hey, make sure we're going to list everything on the statement. And then, you know, of course, we're going to do that in the board policy. And I definitely don't want to exclude anybody. But we're, like I said, so if like we're able to explain in detail, like, hey, this is our equity statement, and in our board policy, this is exactly what we mean, right? Then we don't have to worry about, oh my God, we forgot these, you know, these groups of people in the statement, because we're going to make sure we're very inclusive in the board policy. And when I saw the other statements from other school districts, they're not dissertations, right? They're kind of just like, this is what we stand for. This is like a 3-sentence thing. And then, hey, should you want to define what it is that we're looking for, then you need to go into our policy, which can be the dissertation of exactly what we mean, and, you know, include every underserved and under-resourced student and community that we're talking about. So maybe that will kind of help decide how much or how little we, or, you know, how broad or how detailed we want the statement to be. That's all. Because I see that there's like a fight for that. So my perspective anyway.
Well said.
And then maybe if then we can decide on that statement today, then at least we can agree on the statement, just the statement on the 6th, and then we can go into, hey, we need to go back to this on the board policy and make sure we're including everybody and be a living document. And hey, Nick said, you know, we forgot Indigenous people, or, you know, like foster children, and, you know, whoever else, then we can just put that all in there. You know.
Yeah. I mean, I view the board policy as the law. It's that enforces what we do. And, you know, people will always call us on, well, where's the board policy on that?
Right.
Policy on that. So this is the law that we enforce. So these are the specifics, and the equity is our heart, is our what our belief system.
Yeah, so that's the original point that I was making when I brought this up, was that that's exactly what I want to do. And so if we could pull the statement back up.
Gotcha. Give me 1 second. All
I just
right.
translated for you, Kalima. That's all.
No, it's good. You know,
I think
one of my
it's all-
favorite, one of my favorite sketches with Key and Peele is the translator. So you could you always just be right there to be my translator for me. It's excellent.
Absolutely. Like I see what you're sometimes like I see what you're saying, but then I look at the faces and like, okay, no, this is what she's trying to say. Like where this is like, you know, like so that, you know, like let me just say it in like, you know, the Carla way from the Kalima way, and then it's like, you know, but anyway.
But I think it took all of this for us to all get here.
Yes, like the circle,
Okay.
right.
So
Say,
with-
okay, yeah, you're yes, okay, yes, we got it, Kalima.
So with the statement, this version, I'm fine. I want to add back because I feel like this is also a key thing that helps people not view the whole equality versus equity is to put back in systemic equities to bring about a more just society. So to bring about a more just society was taken out. So I think it should put back in, and then I like the statement as that.
So, oh my gosh. So I think we should delete statement 1, 2. Is that okay with you guys? So we're just working on this one.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So we're not confused. Those are gone.
Yep.
And this is just the statement.
Let me see how I can.
And so JUHSD uses our educational systems to right current and historical inequities by examining and understanding how our decision-making reinforces or interrupts injustice. We embrace inclusion, value diversity, respect all viewpoints, and educate ourselves in order to confront and dismantle systemic inequities. And then this gray part.
It just said the last part, it's systemic inequities to bring about a more just society. That's just my suggestion, opening it up to everybody else.
I think that's good.
We have the word inequities twice, which is fine because I think it needs to be called out. Do we want to do anything to change that? I don't know.
You know, normally
Yes,
I would, but to me, it's like, it's the inequity is the key point. So to me, I don't have a problem saying it multiple times. I think we need to, that's the other piece is, you know, you can, to make the argument of, is the group that you're advocating for suffering from an inequity right now? Which I think a lot of our parents are, you know, the answer is no. For a lot of the parents that come to the board, you're just inconvenienced, right? Or something, but it's not an inequity. And so, you know, I feel like that's a really important distinction that we probably need to kind of hammer home with folks.
Okay.
Yeah, I usually don't like something to sound redundant, but I agree. I think that it's okay to have it twice here. There's no word that really says that exactly.
Yeah, that works for me.
Looks good.
Okay.
Kicking it over to our student trustees. Any comments or feedback on this? Are you guys okay with this?
I think it's good.
Yeah, it looks good.
Right. So I'm going to turn it over to April. April, is there a way that we can include this and send this out for feedback?
Yeah, to which groups? Do you want to do it to everyone in the district, families, students, staff?
It's everybody in the district. That's my opinion. It'll open up to everybody else.
Okay. And are you thinking of certain?
Well, hold on. Is everyone else okay with everybody just sending it out to everybody, or do you want to do it in a specific flow?
Can I,
With what message?
right. And I was going to say that would be my thing is you all may want to agree on how you're going to communicate this, because your feedback you want to make sure you get it in a way you can collect it, like, and it makes sense. So you may want to have some structured talking points on how to share this out. And I would almost actually just encourage you all on October 6th, you present this as a board, right? This is our draft statement that we have collectively agreed to, but we want to get your feedback, and you kind of start that process of here's how we would like to get your feedback. And then you say, hey, it's coming out, and you give time frames, you can be very clear so that it's not something that's confusing to those that are maybe facilitating these conversations, which will include your principals, right? They're the ones that are leading your site. You want to make sure that they all have an understanding of what you're asking, or else you'll have some confusion going forward, and then people's belief systems maybe get in the way of even getting feedback, right? So
we can add it to the board agenda as a discussion item. Nick had his hand raised.
Yeah, that sounds good. I was just gonna ask to kind of to echo what Rosie was saying too about mentioning these things. The board policy, I think it's important how we're discussing it now to discuss the board policy and the statement in tandem. Obviously, I think we will. And then I guess I just had a question. Maybe once we get to the policy, we can discuss this maybe after. But in terms of publicizing, sometimes is the that statement, our board recognizes, includes and it has the affirmative action statement, basically the board policy. How we want to use our statement and how we want to use our policy in terms of promoting it and publicizing, I guess, that in terms of like where we state it. I think it's good to see that. I know when I attend other meetings or see things or even read contracts, that when I see that clause, then I know that it's being stated. So I was wondering how we want to use both the statement and the policy in different places. Because I think a general statement does work and it gets the point across, and this as well. I think does it justice, but I think that the board policy is very important too.
I have a question.
Yes.
It's about it says JUHSD is committed to engage, educate, empower all students with special attention to those underserved and etc. But it says special attention. What is the main point of special attention? How does that could you elaborate on special attention towards the unserved and stuff?
were you all referring to, I don't remember when you had that particular word, but I think that to me spoke to your intentionality around the data, right? And so specifically it was about, yes, you want to empower all students, but you want to ensure that you're really addressing the needs, because that's where equality, you kind of called out equality and equity right here, right? Is all students is equality. We want to make sure all kids have their needs met, but you specifically want to look at equity as serving kids who have not been historically served well in the system. And that's where I think you're going to find race will come up, right? Gender will come up, language will come up, right? Special needs will come up. But I think that was the difference. And I'm just going back to what I think I recall.
And so for me, it's focused. That's going to be the board. We're going to focus on that. So maybe we don't use the word special attention if it's kind of already a little confusing. And maybe have with
intentional, maybe intentional focus, maybe.
Yes.
I like that.
Well, what are your thoughts, Luca? What's your do you have an idea or you have concerns about it? How does it read to you?
Concerned because with the special attention, some people could take special different ways. I'm not saying that they're going to take it negatively, because of course we're trying to provide assistance towards the this part, but special attention, I don't know, it just stuck out to me when I was reading.
Do you like the wording of with intentional focus?
Do you think maybe people might think that like that's not fair, or do you think they'll be offended by it?
I'm not worried about the I should be worried, but I'm not. It's not really worried to me about the feelings of people, because if that's what we're trying to enforce, then it's what we're trying to enforce. The initial attention just gave me. I don't know. It's just I had to reread it a couple times.
Mhm.
Yeah, I feel it just feels clunky. It's kind of a little clunky area. I get that.
I'm trying to gather. I'll let you guys know when I gather. Man.
If I can just say too, the word special does have a stigma, right? I teach in special education. We use that word all the time. It's something that we do own, and we're proud to say, hey, we all are special, right? And whether people are in AP classes or people are in special ed classes, tracking itself is defined by inequities. And so, like people were mentioning, this does address inequity, and Luke calling it out, because the word special, just like we're talking about the word indigent, like there are some words that just are gonna feel like they're gonna target people in a way that it puts you in a box, even though the box may or may not be true, doesn't mean you should be identified and labeled that way. So yeah, I think intentional focus, honestly, I think it's a better way of wording it too. Yeah.
Sorry to cut you off.
No, go ahead.
This special is just, it's like it gives me the idea or the thought of sort of an exclusion from the group, that we're from an exclusion from the whole community. You know what I mean? So if we use special, it's like special. It's like a
Better,
unique
like
way.
better or higher?
Trying to get the hold of it. Okay, hold on.
Yeah, it's okay. We agree with you on the word special. It just, yeah, I'm glad you called that out. That's a good catch.
I changed it in there. If you guys feel good with this, I was going to send an email to Candace right now. I don't think she's actually published in 6. And if she hasn't, I can have her add a discussion item just on this draft equity statement. Do you think we're ready to do that, or should we go over it one more time before I send that?
Good.
I'm thinking more heavily focused, but intentional songs, but I'm thinking heavily focused. Because like if you're, yeah, just you guys took out special, that's all. It's about.
You're cutting in and out. So we heard heavily focused.
Like a heavy focus on those underserved versus intentional focus, it sounds like.
Because what does intention mean?
I think when we say intention, to me, intentional has a higher level of impact than heavy, because everything that I do has to be guided by that. It's just more, our singular focus and our purpose, that it's not something that we're just going to hope happens, or, hopefully if we do these things, it impacts these people. Every decision that we make, our intent behind that decision is to affect change in this areas. So that's why intentional to me is a much more powerful word.
Yeah, that sounds good. That sounds good.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm seeing in the chat, are people suggesting that we say priority instead of intentional? I kind of like intentional myself.
I like intentional.
Yeah, we say everything's a priority in education.
Yeah.
That's it. It's all subjective. That's the problem.
Yeah, real talk.
Heavy focus, intentionality, priority.
Yeah.
Right.
Intentional means we're doing it on purpose. We're deliberate in
Yes.
what we're doing. I think that's good.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And then priority is like we're elevating it in terms of importance.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
All right, do y'all feel comfortable with this one? As a draft, or keyword is it's draft, right? It's still working. It's going to be massaged maybe, but you've given people a great vision on what equity is.
Can I make a suggestion?
Yes.
In terms of the discussion item for the board meeting, does that mean what's included in what does it mean when it's a discussion item?
So for a discussion item, that's usually kind of like a first read through before we vote and put something into practice. So it's the first time that's introduced to the community at large, saying or to the board, letting everyone know that this is something that is going to be voted on in a future board meeting to adopt. So it'll be brought out to just for the board to discuss and make comments about it, about why we feel it's important, or to make any changes at that time too. And then it'll be brought back in a future board meeting to approve.
Cool. And then do people get to make public comment right after that?
Yeah.
Because then I would suggest as a public comment prompt or question, like, how should we get feedback on this? Like, what should be the process? Because I like what Nicole was saying, like really structuring it, you know, and then we can get input in terms of like, what's the most strategic way, instead of just like, hey, everybody, here's a survey, versus maybe like first taking it to principals, get their thoughts, kind of massage it, then, you know, giving talking points to principals to share with their staff. And once staff have given input, then we share it back with students and then get their input. But maybe people have other ideas. And then another discussion prompt, or, you know, could be around what Nick was saying, like how should the district incorporate this statement to ensure that it's at the forefront of, you know, all of the work that we do moving forward. Like, do we put it on the website, on these documents?
So my hope is that April can come up with a communication plan around how we introduce this and how we get feedback. And that could be part of the presentation. And then she could also get feedback at that meeting as well. So if she comes, we could give her direction now to come to the board meeting with a plan on how this is going to be introduced to the community, how she plans to get feedback. We can give, as a board, give feedback to her in suggestions and direction for her communication plan. And she can also hear from the community at that same time, make adjustments, and then move forward with that. I think Tiffany, your suggestion needs to be broken up. I think we do the first part is get this through the community, get it approved. And then the second piece is how should we use it? Because I don't want to say how should we use it in the same communication about do you like it? Because then it kind of suggests,
yeah,
you know, we're already using this one. So, you know what I mean?
Yeah. Agreed.
And Tiffany, the discussion in a board meeting isn't like it's not an actual back and forth discussion. Do you know what I mean? It's
people are saying it, right?
The board is discussing and the public can make comment on it, but the board isn't really supposed to go back and forth.
Yeah, just soliciting those.
Yeah.
And I would be more than willing to work with April in terms of even talking points if necessary. I think you make it real simple. You know, you don't want to do too much complexity, including a survey, because there's going to be folks who you're not going to reach. So just even having something sitting on your website, right, to just say, hey, give feedback about our equity statement and some key things that you can collect, because you want to be able to collect the data easily. You don't want it to be so convoluted that someone, you know, who's going to collect this, by the way, and disaggregate this data is going to be important too, to talk about whose role is this. So you want to make it as simple as possible so that you can get back the feedback. And also I would suggest that before your October meeting on the 6th, that you also have not only, you know, how you're going to collect feedback, but also some timelines, right? So obviously, Kalima, you said this is a discussion on the 6th, right? But then when do you want to vote? So you all have to have that timeline already. You know, maybe it's a month, or you pick November that you want to actually take a vote on it, right? But in between, you have some timelines on collecting the data. The board needs to then see the data, right? So you can probably have another study session between the time that you're going to vote. So you want to just make sure those timelines are pretty clear as well for October 6th, which again could be part of the discussion item.
So do you want me, I'm sitting here thinking of my next action. So I can ask, because I don't think she's published it yet. So if I can get in there before she publishes it, that's best. I'm just going to put the statement as a discussion item without all the, we know that we want to do those other things, but is it okay if I just have her put the statement in there and then we'll talk about this?
We can also, I would say put the statement and policy, because it's just a discussion.
Yeah.
Okay. And the policy as is right now, because or are we going to work on it and then we'll give her that one?
So we can, I don't know. We'll see what happens. I mean, she just has to have the agenda item in there. So she can always amend to add additional attachments, but I think we're definitely going to discuss both the policy, the statement and the policy. So we know that.
Okay.
And just remember, today was designed for you to look at your policy. But again, this is one of those non-closures. Unpacking your policy takes a lot of time, and I think you needed your time for your statement, right? Like those are two different tasks. But I do want to say this, that you can definitely include it in the discussion. I think it would be a good idea to talk about what are those things that you're continuously looking at in your policy, right? And so you have some language you wanted to look at. I think some of the things you were calling out in your priorities of the work probably should be embedded in here, which you have most of those. But again, remember you adopted CSBA's policy. So I specifically remember you saying, we want to make this our own, right? So it's okay to say, here's our draft policy, but we're still making adjustments. And I think it's fine to say that on October 6th. But for today, I do want to ask the group, how much do you want to go into your policy piece? Because we also have a little less than an hour to also talk about those priorities. Remember those 4 buckets? We want to make sure we revisit that just to make sure. And the same token, you're paralleling the work, by the way. You're doing your action planning as we speak, but you want to prioritize what are going to be your real focus areas of the governance team work. So do you want to spend some time on your policy today? Just kind of, there's a couple of things I could point out that you can, consider, but we don't have to spend a lot of time. But I definitely want to make sure you have time to do your 4 buckets that you all started that conversation in the last study session.
I think we can move on to the buckets, and then if you just want to email us your suggestions for the policy, we could discuss those suggestions at the board meeting.
Okay, sure.
Does that work?
Yep. I'll put that on. And then, by the way, our next study session, which I got to go back to, I don't think we have a date set, but we can also include that in our study session. So I'll make sure I put that in as well.
Okay.
All right, perfect. All right, so I'm going to do one more check because Zoom exhaustion is real. Do you need a 3-minute stretch break? Because it's been another hour. Y'all want to do some chair yoga together? Do you all need a 5-minute break? Just run to the restroom, anything like that? Because we're on our last home stretch, but I want to make sure because Zoom exhaustion is very real.
Yes, please.
Okay, thank you, Rosie. All right, let's do 5 more minutes. Come back at 11:15 and we'll finish off. All right.
He just wants to say hi.
Oh, hey, Brycey. How are you doing? I miss you.
I miss you too.
I miss you too.
Thank you. I was so excited. I was like, we're gonna have our walks again this year because we did 2 walks together last year.
Yes.
I walked, you ran.
Yes, ran.
You ran the whole time. I'm so missing our walks.
You miss your walks with Auntie? Hmm?
He's like, only if she was gonna buy ice cream.
No, he got it. Oh yeah, that too. Well, that's a winner right there. We just got gloves, so he just wants to try them on.
That's okay. And you just had a birthday.
He did.
You're a grown man now.
Are you a grown-up boy now? Yeah.
Mhm.
How old are you?
5 years old.
5 years old.
Put it on. Put it on. Yeah.
Those are nice. I like it.
Where do we get them at? Where do we get them at?
At Costco.
Ooh, start them young.
Oh, they They know when we go to Costco and Target, okay?
There you go.
Before they even, can read. They know the little symbols.
Yeah, they're like, we're going to the
Right.
place with the softies.
Oh yeah.
Soft serve.
I do miss our walks. We've been going biking on the weekends. So I finally like buckled down and got a bike too. Yes. Oh, for jiu-jitsu? Okay. But yeah. So, and they go, even on the scooter, they go way fast. Like I can't walk and have them be on the bike because I'll lose them. Or they'll lose me anyway. You say good morning?
Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning.
I'm not tall yet. I'm just
You're not-
standing on the chair.
Oh, I thought you grew so much since the last time I saw you, but you're just standing on the chair?
Mhm.
Okay. Thank you for telling me. I would not have known. I haven't seen you in so long. Oh, wow. Oh, look at how big you
Okay, Bryce. Okay. Get out of here. Okay.
Anyway,
Bye-bye.
bye-bye.
Okay. Oh my God.
Hey, Carly.
I got my baby here. Can I say hi?
Hey.
Hey,
Yeah.
Carly. Working woman now.
I know.
Paying those taxes. Better vote so you know where your money goes.
Yo, she buys lightsabers and stuff with her.
That's right, Carly. That's right.
Right. I was like, as she should. Do it while you can.
She bought a
lightsaber. I can't tell you how much money I dropped on lightsaber.
I know.
I don't want to know either.
She bought a Kylo Ren Build-A-Bear with a lightsaber.
Yeah.
Oh, Lord.
That's okay.
Hey.
Oh my God. So the lady, when I was at Build-A-Bear doing the exact same thing, she was like, who this for? Who is this for? And I was like, me, and let's not judge. Okay. I'm feeling a tone in your voice.
Oh, Lord. That's fantastic. Yeah, she better go buy that stuff. She got paid, start paying rent, okay?
Oh my God, when I do stuff with the people are like, oh my God, Clem, you're such a good mom. You always take your kids to this stuff. And I'm like, yeah, it's for my children.
Yeah, it's like, yeah, I benefit from it too.
Right.
Sure. That's right. I'm doing this because I'm a good parent and I want my kids to have fun.
There you go.
Yep.
So now they didn't know.
As an excuse. As an excuse.
Right. No one saw thank God no one videotaped me like pushing them out of the way. Like, get out, watch out.
Oh, Lord. Oh, Lord.
At some point, I'll be able to go back.
All right, you all ready? Y'all having too much fun. I went down the hallway and I left the sound up and I was like, they're having a party in there. Let me come back to this.
Well, it was Bryce having a party.
This is how we should have study sessions more often.
He's having his private conversation with Kalima as usual.
Because that's my baby right there.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I'm gonna put the priorities document in there just because we're gonna look at the quadrants. I'm just gonna put those notes back in there for you. That's in the link. And then I'm also going to refer back to what is that? Your old agenda. There it is. Okay. I wonder if I want to put this in here. Yeah, I think I'm gonna put this in our notes. All right, copy. The notes are here. right, so let's see. Let me go ahead and share my screen now so y'all can see what I just did to our notes. Okay, so just kind of coming back, I know you all are good with your equity statement in terms of October 6th, and you will have a discussion item on it, and then also set the tone for how you want to get input from your community. And the only suggestion I had was create a timeline as well. So those two things would be important to share when you need it back, when you want to actually vote on this. So what I want to do is go into the conversation about your, and this is going back to your notes, by the way, the framework that you had. And so I'm just referring to some of the notes. We don't need to go through all of them, but you all were starting to talk about kind of the purpose, right? Some roles, timeline. We definitely still need to wrestle with what is that timeline you want to have for this work. And specifically, I think the statement kind of drives some of your timeline right now. But you do want to think about how you're going to communicate this out. And I think that was the conversation you just brought up. And then at some point, we're going to talk about how you measure the impact of this work. And so I don't think we need to go into details of your measurements yet, but I do want to say first step is coming up with your statement so you can actually have a measurement for the work. So it's hard to say, here's what equity looks like, how you measure what equity looks like when you didn't say what equity is. So you all did that first step. So then your metrics are going to come in the form of data collection and those different aspects that you're going to really start to unpack some of these challenges. And so your priorities is what I'm calling them as a governance team, and remembering that it's important to prioritize the work so that you can actually be laser focused on actually addressing those gaps. And so when you have 1,000 priorities, unfortunately, you won't get anything done well. And so that's where this conversation came in, and you all started to wrestle with the LCAP priorities, what we call them. And so that's the piece I'm going to go to right now and switch documents. Okay. And so you talked about HR, you talked about budget, you talked about teaching and learning, and you talked about community climate. One thing that you did wrestle with was facilities came up, if you recall. And you talked about, is that going to be a priority, or do we want to really look at that as one of the, obviously there's lots of things you do in governance, but what are those things that bubble to the top when you talk about addressing student achievement, addressing equitable outcomes for kids? So these are the 4 things you left with, and then you tabled those for today. So what I'm going to do is switch and show you the other document. And those of you, I think Tony and Tiffany, you are both taking notes. So however you want to wrestle with these is fine. I don't want you to feel like you have to, use my format. I just literally copied and pasted from your last agenda. So here's the other document that I just shared in the chat, okay? And you all remember you were kind of wrestling around like, what are our priorities, right? Which is really important. And things that bubble to the top are a lot of these. I know that this was one that you all kind of said, hey, we're going to switch, and we're going to, I think you agreed that you're going to take facilities off, and you're actually going to, I think the word you used was, I just looked at it and forgot that fast. Community climate, I think was the word. So is that okay with us to go ahead and switch that to community climate? Okay.
Works for me.
Okay. And that was, I'm just going, and literally I listened to it last night so that I did not forget. And you all wrestle with this. And facilities was one I brought up because it's obviously something that falls into that operational part of the work. And so, like I mentioned, it should be a priority when you pass a bond measure, right? Because now you're talking about budget, right? And how budget is allocated towards, specific facilities. That's where that conversation comes up. But when you look at what bubbles to the top of governance teams, facilities not necessarily going to be that each time. So we want to make sure that you have a real lens for how you're going to do your equity work, and just narrow that focus to at least 4 things. And some narrow it to 3. But I think it's hard to go any lower than those 4 because you do have a lot that you have to oversee as a governance team. And again, it's not saying that other things don't matter, right? But what it is you're prioritizing your work so that you can really do well. And these 4 buckets you selected, actually, honestly, they cover a lot. Okay, so I want to make sure that we have a chance today to wrestle with this. And I remember Nick specifically saying, okay, are we going through each one of these and kind of going through the nuances? And so I think this is our moment to do that. Like, let's take some time and unpack, what do all of these things mean? What falls under these buckets? So it sounds like you all agreed to them. And so at this point, whoever wants to take notes, fine, or I can take notes either way. It's up to you, so you all can fully participate. So you let me know. But I think, Tiffany, you were taking a lot of notes too, correct? Okay. So I'm going to stay off of it because if I take notes and someone else doesn't, I always mess it up. So So I'll let you continue to take notes. But I do want to just kind of pause and let's go through the priorities, right? Let's go through what you have so far. And I know you started with HR, teaching and learning, budget became a conversation. Let's do this though, just because we didn't have a chance to go through school climate. Let's start there, community climate. Let's start there, and then we can kind of go to each bucket. Okay, so maybe we spend about 10 minutes on each. Okay, as best we can. Okay, and I say 10 loosely because you have about 40 minutes left altogether anyway. All right, so community climate. Tell me what you were thinking about community climate. Let's open up that discussion because, you know, what is that priority? Is that around student discipline, around police and schools? So this is where you start to wrestle with what does community climate actually mean? I'll let you all open up for discussion.
Yeah, I think police and schools fits in there. We have only one school resource officer, and is he really, we don't even know what his function is at this point, you know. What do the kids think of having him there?
Okay, so police and schools, specifically SRO.
And oh, go ahead.
Sorry.
Oh,
No, I was just going to ask, isn't he only in our Daly City schools too? Like that's not in Pacifica, but in Daly City.
Right, just Daly City.
and then the other piece of this is really firming up policy around police interaction in our schools. When is it okay to call a police officer? When it is, when isn't it? So, and then another piece of this for me is building some sort of MOU with our police, all of our police jurisdictions, and how they, you know, how they operate on our school sites.
So we would agree police and schools would be one. And I didn't say this, but I don't want you to go too much in the weeds on each of these, but I do want you to call out the things. And this is a big one, so I don't want to say you're in the wrong direction, but I want to make sure that you have ample time for each of these. So school, police and schools is a big one, and you got called out a couple of things: relationship roles, the MOU. What else do you want to call out under community climate?
Curriculum.
Okay. So is that like culturally relevant curriculum? Okay.
Does that go under teaching and learning though?
I think it could. I mean, to me, not being reflected in the curriculum affected the climate for me, but I think it could go under teaching and learning. You're right.
Just a question, just to point of process or clarity, because I do think it's important to just kind of put what we need to in all these buckets. Maybe like what Kalima and Tiffany both saying, maybe we can sort through it later. I don't know what's faster, what's more efficient, because I feel like there are a lot of things that overlap, and that's what, like, with the reasons Nicole, you mentioned,
Yeah, and keep this in mind, Nick, too, is that you all are going to unpack data, right? So you're just kind of doing like I think this is what really we need to focus on, but there's going to be data to reveal like, hey, we need to focus, so for example, in community climate, police and schools, culturally relevant curriculum, discipline is going to come up, right? Your suspensions, expulsion. So those are kind of the big things, right? And I think you're going to continue to do your study sessions, right? Around, you should have a budget study session. You're going to have a community climate study session. So right now we're kind of doing big picture of what kind of things does this look like. So that's why I said I'm just going to give you like maybe 10 minutes for each, right? But I do think the whole group discussion is important. And then you all should have, I think you all said you were sharing this document with each other before, and you were going to place your thoughts in along the way. So I don't know, once I back out, I don't know what happens in between. So I thought this discussion was important in your last session. And so I'm going to keep you on task. You got a few more minutes for this one, and we're going to move to the next bucket. So we want to make sure we hit them all for sure. So discipline, curriculum, police and schools. Can we put culturally relevant curriculums? I think I heard that from Kalima, if I heard you correct, right? Kalima, that's what you're referring to? Okay.
Yes.
Perfect.
And then can we also put school safety?
School safety, yeah.
I think physical safety, like psychological safety, like how students feel at school.
And I'm wondering, that's policies, like your safety plan has policies and protocols too, right? For when there's an emergency as well. So I think that's going to be important too.
And then I'm dealing with like students issues between students and between different student groups, fights, things like that.
Mm-hmm. Those student interactions.
Mhm.
Mm-hmm.
Can we say conflict resolution too? Maybe it's not a dated term. I think it's still relevant, but in terms of restorative justice, when we talk about safety, that means different things to different people, right? And even yeah. So I think that, and I think Luca was mentioning that, right? So that's a really good point.
Thanks, Nick. I was struggling. I was like, there's a word or term that I'm looking for. Yes. Exactly what I'm. Thank you.
I like to add engaging the families that have language barriers. So, making sure that they're included as, that they're fully informed and engaged as well. Just, not letting their language barrier be an obstacle for them to be engaging as well.
So parent engagement and specifically calling out language.
Yeah, or make sure, I know we have some liaisons that do go to the families. I know, especially at Thornton, but just making sure that we have that for all the other schools as well too.
Awesome. Okay. Good. Tiffany, can you just, because this is also from my memory when we come back to this, is discipline. Can you just remind us to include the matrix, right? Because you all should have a discipline plan or matrix, whatever the word is. But I think that's going to be important to look at that, because that's where the policies and behavior expectations fall in. So I think that's a good one to call out. All right. Any other things that you think are missing under school climate, community climate, before we jump to our next one? Go ahead, Nick.
Yeah, I was gonna say, in terms of engaging the community, like colleges, college students, nonprofits, community partners, right? Welcoming them on campus, because we do talk about police and needing the clarity for that because of the relationships that have or have not been established there. But in terms of building relationships with community partners that we do want to welcome in accomplishing things.
And is this where you may want to include the partnerships that you called out in your piece around the work, like what Tiffany, myself, Ed Trust West is doing as well? So maybe looking at how that fits into that in terms of, I don't know if this where it fits. Yeah. I'm just throwing it out there when you said partner. So.
Yeah, all of that. I think even just like, we talk about student teachers and why some schools get more student teachers than others, and in terms of outreach and retention projects and cultural student groups at the colleges, but state or community colleges, Skyline and City, all of this. Yeah. No.
Okay, got it. Okay, sorry, I didn't realize it was going to the other screen. There we go. All right, perfect. Okay, so you feel like he captures community climate. I think that's important that you at least capture the big picture. This is a priority. These are important things that should rise to the top for us. And that as a governance team, we're going to be measuring and monitoring. Okay. All right, so I'm going to move you to, let's go up to budget. Okay, we're going to move up to budget. All right, so for budget, you already started with 3 things you talked about before, that it reflects equity. So I think that was the spirit of like our belief systems really show up in our budget, right? What we value shows up in our budget. CTE was the career tech ed piece, restorative justice. So these were all ways that you sound like you were thinking about how you allocate your budget. Right. Other things that rise to the top.
So CTE, so this is maybe me personally, I always have a problem when CTE is brought up in terms of equity, because that's always the thing that's suggested for certain students. Other parents are not comfortable with their kids being part of CTE and fight it hard and want their kids to go to college, and there's kind of this acceptance. It's that everybody feels like, I get told this all the time, anytime we push for college for everybody, the pushback is certain kids just aren't back. And they're never talking about their kids.
Yep, got it.
So, for me, if we're gonna have CTE on here, then we need to have college, because the data shows the one thing that creates equity, especially with African-American males, is college. if they have a college degree, every data point changes.
So Kalima, would it be a good idea in here just to notate that we need to, in our budget, we need to really, because remember, at the governance level, right? So we're going to be measuring the purpose and kind of revisiting the purpose and measuring the impact of our budget impacting college and career pathways. Would that be fair to say that?
Yes. Yes.
So revisiting the purpose, because if we're allocating money towards something, if you don't measure the impact of it, and it shows that you're tracking kids all over again, right? The whole vocational versus college track. So that would be a good one just to notate that we want to measure the purpose of this and the impact, really understand the purpose and measure the impact. So that's a good one you called out. Okay, so budget, thinking about our budget, what are those things that bubble to the top? Budget.
Ongoing professional development related to equity.
Your professional development.
Wellness.
Oh, that's one, sorry. Wellness.
Is that for staff and students, would you say?
I would say the equity in how we pay people ourselves as a district.
Say that again?
Yes. Yeah.
The equity around how we pay people ourselves as a district. Like, I think we need to start being much more mindful of that as a district, to acknowledge how we are also part of the whole pay disparities.
Got it. Okay, so looking at the salary schedule. This may come into play with your bargaining unit conversations as well. So negotiations, so that may come under, probably should come under this budget as well. Although HR will also overlap with that, I think, but it makes sense because most of your budget goes towards your employees. So it's a good discussion. Okay, anything else that bubbles to the top with budget?
I think the another thing is that it should reflect our values.
I think looking at, and I think we alluded to it below, but kind of looking at staffing levels at each of the schools. We are doing that, but making them more equitable.
I think Nick had mentioned that also earlier, right? How staff is allocated to schools, which again is probably going to show up in your HR. So you'll notice these two are going to overlap, and truthfully, the budget is going to overlap with everything, right? Because your LCAP is going to reflect where you're spending your money. So,
and then looking, we are maybe going to have to make cuts. So making sure that those are equitably handled as well.
Got it. Okay.
What about like staff housing and stuff? Or what are those, like incentives or supports or benefits?
It's a benefit.
Tell me more about what your question was, Tiffany, when you were referring to the cuts?
No, not the cuts necessarily, as another way of looking at budget and equitable distribution, because I know the housing piece was a part of that too.
Got it. Okay.
Just how to categorize that.
Yeah.
So I think just ensuring all benefits are equitably distributed. Is that what you're trying to say here?
Good. Okay. And this one's a tough one because again, you have a budget that has a lot of, you spend money in lots of ways. So this is good that again, you're prioritizing your equity work, and these are things that will rise to the top, right? That impact student achievement, impact student experiences. So your LCAP budget, this is why you do study sessions on just budget alone, right? Because you're gonna have to unpack a lot of these. You're gonna have to make some decisions soon about, future budget cuts possibly. I can't recall if bond measure was on your ballot for this. So maybe that should come up around the bond measure if the money if it passes, how is that money managed? And is it going to be about equity? So that's going to come up, right? About your facilities plan, all that good stuff. So that might be one to consider.
A little helpful too, because even in thinking about staff housing, right? A lot of teachers made the point that, you know, they're not going to be able to move into housing, but if it's equity, if we're distributing the benefits equitably, that's the equity issue. If you already have housing, we need to ensure that we're equitably distributing our resources. So it's helpful in having that discussion around, that's why we made that budget decision. There was inequality happening with housing within our teacher ranks. So directed funds. So this is all, I'm just bringing it up because it's also
perfect.
Frame arguments and how we talk.
Cool. So you feel like we've captured a good sense of, you know, how you want to really be laser focused around equity around budget. Okay. So you feel comfortable, we can move on over to our next priority, which was human resources. I call it staffing, so however you want to call it, but human resources is really around, again, the largest part of your budget, right? But also this is about human capital, right? Like people who work, staffing. So let's look at what we've already shared. Let's see if there's what you want to add.
I think here continuing the leadership pipeline of underrepresented communities with the emphasis on staff of color. I would also add here that we don't have this as policy, but I think it's added as policy that I like that administrative level staff meets with the board and close before we approve it. So we use that time to kind of re-emphasize that we're a board that's focused on equity. So know that before you come into the district. I mean, I think it's a really nice thing that before we vote on it, there's kind of that discussion with the executive cabinet superintendent board about our priority.
Yeah.
So I would like to see that continue and have that something that's more formal. It's right now it's because we decided it.
Yeah. So Kalima, would that fall into even job descriptions? Because I think that's going to be a big piece that comes up when you post a position. It should be very clear what the expectation is, which drives into you all have the bullet point about culture responsive interview questions, right? So even that's more like the process, right? But if you're the board, really, again, you're at that 30,000 foot level. So you create the framework, you have the vision, but obviously the, you know, HR superintendent hires people, but with that framework,
yeah,
the job descriptions may be one to call out, you know, in terms of positions that you're posting. Other things that pop out for human resources.
What about our, making sure that we're looking to hire people of color when it comes to our walk-on coaches and athletics? I think that's an area that we, sometimes we just simply hire who is available, but I think there should be greater intentionality there.
Okay.
Athletics and what, Andy?
Just mainly athletics. Yeah, I think that's fine what you wrote. Intentional hiring staff of color for athletics.
And then also looking at our hiring policies and practices to make sure they're up to date. Because I know Nick brought this up before about how certain things that may have been disqualifiers as felonies, but California has changed the law. I don't know if it's on here, I think, but
I think we added decriminalizing misdemeanors related to drugs and alcohol up above.
I think broadening that out a little bit.
Oh,
yeah. So yeah.
Got you.
Yeah, just to add to that, thank you, Clint, for bringing it up. There is a question mark around cannabis. I did bring it up with first in mind, thinking about decriminalization of cannabis offenses, because like you mentioned, the law has changed vastly. I think you say even in the last couple of years, but when you think about drugs and alcohol and rehabilitation and a lot of the things that we're looking at as a society, decriminalizing, the war on drugs, that, if somebody it's looked at one way, but if somebody has had a cannabis conviction, it almost completely bars them sometimes, depending on how our HR processes are structured. So take out the question mark around cannabis, or maybe just leave it as is and then expand the definition to understand where the law is going.
When I think too, just to broaden out, and the reason why I bring this up is that we met with San Mateo County is looking at closing juvenile hall, and we met with one of the people that's spearheading that, and he was charged with a felony, and now he's back in the community doing tons of great work, but he's not really allowed on a lot of schools districts because of that felony. But if I feel like if people could hear his story, like he would be an awesome person to have in a school, is what I'm trying to say. And if we could have more, if there's some way that we can look at, like you said, reviewing hiring criteria, make sure we're not excluding people that could be potentially valuable as teachers, as, you know, staff on campus that may have gotten in trouble in their youth and charged with a felony, but have, you know, have years of positive, you know, or just great people.
Absolutely.
And also with an emphasis, with the lens of looking at, you're much more likely to get arrested if you're a person of color and charged with a felony. So we're excluding a lot of folks here.
So would it be ideal if you all call out the, because I think maybe it was Nick that said we want to make sure our hiring practices are up to date, I should say. So making sure you all are still staying in compliance with the law. So I think it's important you recognize that too, so you don't have a lawsuit if something happens, right, and you miss something because of so the background checks are important, but also you have some discretion, right, to make those decisions. So maybe there's calling out that piece about making sure your hiring practices are in alignment with current ed code, current, you know, law is important to protect yourselves. But also maybe there's a piece about people who have had, you know, any issues in the past, and even current people who don't have a record, right? Like this whole piece about holding people accountable, but also supporting people. And I think you called out professional learning in your budget, but I think this might be a place to say in our staffing, our human resources, we have to make sure we provide support, but also hold people accountable, right? And that's going to be important when you're doing equity work, because people cannot continue to harm children, but you got to make sure they're aware and they're supported to understand what that harm means. And then we're not going to accept it. So therefore there's some accountability, but balancing that out is going to be important. Support and accountability. Yeah, support and accountability.
Tony, you had your hand raised.
Thank you. I'm sorry. I'm like going like this. So I actually really love that we're talking about this. Since I've been in the district, it would be really great to have it come from the board down, because our district has a clear bent towards not allowing anybody with anything to come into the, you know, like any distance of time ago, we have had a practice of just not allowing them to work in our district or to coach in our district, et cetera. And so I don't think like that. And since I was in charge of HR, I have been, you know, fighting that fight for the last 2 years. And so we do, there's a really clear set of expectations of who can and cannot work. And they're very clear. And a lot of it, we have just been using sort of our discretion to decide who we will hire. So it would be really helpful to have very clearly set out, you know, expectations from the board. I will be the superintendent, so it'll be different because I will, you know, also come at it from that bent. But I think that we have really kept large groups of people out of working in our district, and I think unfairly. So that's my editorialism there.
Mm-hmm. Rosie?
So I know that in Jefferson Elementary, my daughter had a middle school teacher who at back to school night was very open about his history, and that he had spent some time in jail, but got his life together. You know, had met a great teacher at Skyline, encouraged him to continue to get become a teacher. And so he was able, but then I do recall that one day, so I didn't question it because he's a teacher. You know, he clearly was able to teach despite this. But then later on, and I never questioned it, Carly said, oh, today he said, I have some great news. I don't, and I guess a mentor teacher was there and told him that his probation he's cleared. He doesn't need to have any more supervision or something like that. And I wonder if that's something we could do, or it was baffling to me, but he was an incredible teacher. One of those teachers students go back and visit and let him know that, I remember everything you taught me kind of teacher.
Got it.
Yeah.
This is good stuff. You all are in a really good place. Rosie, I'm happy you brought that up. One thing that comes to mind with HR, just make sure that whatever you do in your hiring framework, make sure you run it by your attorney, right? Because you want to make sure you are covering yourselves and, obviously having a vision. That is the board's responsibility, but you want to also protect yourself from any litigation that you may miss because of wanting to have inclusive practices. But again, remember, you're shifting the system, you're making changes. So in that, you want to be proactive so that you don't have to go backpedal and then all of a sudden it blows up because it can happen. I hate saying that, it can happen. So you want to just really be mindful of that. So I want to make sure, because we have about a little less than 15 minutes, and I want to make sure we get to our last priority. So I want to make sure we're good on HR. There's a lot you can see to unpack with HR, and I'm thankful, Tony, that you have that experience. So this is one where I think with the board, you can really help give some even more close direction because you'll have such an insight. But this is good stuff. You all are unpacking some really great stuff, and so I just appreciate that. Oh, that's a good one.
Resolution, yes. Thank you.
Good idea. Yep. Absolutely. The restorative practices we want with kids, we want to do the same thing with adults. You know what? You called out, by the way, let me go back. I think I mentioned something about bargaining units, but you may want to call that out in terms of your negotiation process, doing that, with an equity lens, right? I think that's going to be important. So we don't want to forget that's a big piece of the work. All right, so we good with that? Are you okay with moving to teaching and learning? Okay.
So for teaching and learning, like student discipline is always at the top, and one of the things that doesn't get talked about a lot is how extra credit is handed out. What students are allowed to make up work. And if there's a way to track which students are given forgiveness on makeup work and extra credit.
Okay. So would that be around like assessment of student work? I
feel like when it's tracked and when people find a way to track, like when extra credit is assigned, is usually the same data presents itself if it's disproportionately assigned.
Okay, got it. Okay. And this may all fall under grading, by the way. So I just want to make sure I call you to that because there's a lot of ways that teachers go, how they assess kids, right? And it falls under, that grading piece, what goes into a grade, which may come up for you in itself, right? What is the grading policy, which you all have, and is it equitable? So that's definitely one you're going to have to unpack, but you called it out, so you're good. Makeup word,
access and promotion of AP classes. Mm-hmm. Open access and promotion, or more open access.
Good one.
For HR?
For teaching.
AP and honors courses.
Although it does overlap into HR because there have been questions around, compensation and capacity for teachers teaching AP classes, but I think that should go for, I guess it's a good point to make then access and promotion of AP classes for enrollment and for teaching opportunities.
I think another thing in teaching and learning is which assessments we continue to use. Because, right now we're using the SAT as an assessment, but UCs they're dropping SAT. So we're spending money on this test. And I don't, and again, if the district wants to continue to use that as an assessment, like that's fine. I'll take direction from the educational professionals on this. But how many assessments do we need? Are we going to do SAT and CASP and
Actually, to that effect too, just to add, because we're in distance learning, when these assessments are being given and what accommodations and modifications are being provided, and how they're being provided, it has and this is across the nation, obviously, or, as many places that are not returning to in person. which is pretty much the entire nation. But that, and in terms of the LPAC, I think that's another one to understand is like how are all these things being administered, and how are we going to look at it this year in the context of it.
I know SATs were dropping because they're not allowing people to, and this is in the weeds, but they're making you go in person.
Right.
Which is ridiculous.
Yeah.
But that's just for this year.
I'd just like to add special education onto the list.
Yes, please.
You know, just are we providing the best, accessibility, I guess, for the program and having those students succeed too? Because I remember that we were in a meeting one time and somebody put on chat, like, that's great that we're doing AP tests, but that also, it's like a certain amount of students that are doing those tests, and what are we, helping all the other children as well, and not just the AP course students, so.
Go ahead, Mustafa, jump on in.
Access to extra help, like after school programs or whatever, like things like that, because the students that need extra help often have a hard time getting it.
And then can we add to that, like add counselors, like access to counselors? And mental health. Do we have mental health on here? I knew we did somewhere, but.
Under community climate has wellness in it.
Oh yeah, it does.
Or is it wellness?
I think it was in budget.
Budget.
Yeah, I think you all put it in budget. Yeah, I think you put it in budget wellness.
And the reason I included in the teaching and learning is that the students have repeatedly told us that the biggest indicator or the biggest cause of stress is homework and grading.
Yeah. Do you want to call out relationships here? Just student-teacher relationships? Maybe rigorous instruction, which I always say is just a fancy word for high expectations for all kids.
Yeah.
Whether AP or just, your regular coursework. But I think that's a big one, that low expectations for students of color, low expectations based on the stereotypes associated with kids, unfortunately, is very real in the classroom. So,
yep.
You call out relevance. Yeah. All right.
To add on to like student-teacher relationships, I know there are some teachers who will often compare students like to other students, which doesn't help the situation, and it can mess up the classroom environment and create like a hostile environment towards other students.
Yes, Nick, thank you. Ethnic studies. We do have culturally relative. We have up at the top the culturally reflective curriculum. But I don't know, we could add another bullet to that. If we scroll.
It would be really important, because I saw that there too, yeah.
So I want you to just take a moment as you look back, and I'm going to kind of make this smaller so you can see.
Think, no, 1 second. Tiffany, not under this one and the one above it.
Right up there.
Ethnic studies is different than culturally reflective classrooms.
Right. Yep.
With culturally responsive curriculum, or
Yes,
just
culturally responsive curriculum, because I feel like it's and it's an ongoing discussion, but I feel like, yes, we need to have specific classes that focus on specific culture, but I also feel like every class should be reflective of the ethnicity. There's a story that could be told in every class, and if you don't see yourself reflected somewhere, you don't think it's for you. So math, there's examples that are used for math that could be more culturally reflective. There's things in science that could be more culturally reflective.
For sure.
Perfect. So as you all kind of, look at these, we have about 5 minutes left. So I want to make sure that, we have a chance to pause and just kind of sit back and reflect on what our next steps are. But you have come up with
one
four.
more thing.
Go ahead.
After themselves in the curriculum, can we also add and textbooks or all books?
Oh, yeah. Good one.
Themselves in the curriculum and all books, not just the textbooks, because the library.
Supplemental. So yeah, that's a good one, Kalima. Yep, curriculum. That's big. Call it out. All right. Did you capture that one, Tiffany? I think I'm on.
It's up at the top of this one.
It is. Okay.
The culturally responsive curriculum. Students should see themselves in the curriculum in all books, texts.
All books, yeah. Perfect. All right. Good stuff. All right.
There we go.
Good stuff. Yeah, excellent. So now take a deep breath for a moment. You're like, whew. So now this is a lot. And I say a lot, meaning if you have four, this is 4 priorities. Now we could easily add another 20 priorities, and you see how it'd be very hard for you to get anything done. Just one of these priorities alone is a lot of work to unpack and a lot of work to measure and monitor and really provide support towards. So that's why you see where I wanted you to really break it down to just pick 4. But you see what's happening. There's a lot of things that fall under those 4. And so if you can apply your equity lens as a governance team to these 4 priorities, there's a lot you can actually do to really close equity gaps in the school district, because you're addressing staff, right? You're addressing the community, you're addressing students, you're addressing really the entire system with these 4 priorities. So that should make you feel really good that you're not missing anything, right? But in your policy, one of the next steps that I'm going to suggest is that your policy, in your revision, some of these priorities will show up in your policy. And actually, you have a lot of them in there already, believe it or not. But they will show up in your actual equity policy, which will also reference other policies that you have. So I just want you to just pause and feel good about you have really prioritized your work just in that few moments, in these few study sessions. And so now the next steps are, how do we make these things happen, right? And even the priorities of those bullet points you have under each priority, right? You're gonna have to narrow even your focus on that so that you can actually address an equity gap. But overarchingly, this is the work of running the school district, right? There's a lot of work to do. So how do you prioritize it so you can be effective? And if you can hit all 4 of these areas, it'll be like a domino effect with everything else. It'll just be the way you do business. And so I'm really excited for you on that. So what I want to do is just share with you, you all have this document, so please save it for your notes so that you can be able to go back to this for your next session. And so what I want to do is just share, let's see.
And one more thing really quickly before we move on, I do want to say that in the other document that had the framework and the roles, I do think we're gonna, after this meeting, we're discussing goals for Tony. But I think one of those big things is building the roles and the framework on how we go about doing all this work, which I don't think we've ever done in this district. And so like getting a better understanding, Tiffany, from you and Circle Up of like, what is your capacity and what exactly could you be doing that's in regards to this work? And then getting that clear understanding on, because I know Corinne's plate is full. So what does she handle? And then what can you handle, Tiffany, so that it's not all on her, because normally all this rolls over to her. And Tony help, I think working with you to kind of get clear roles, how we fold April into this, and then how we go about putting together the framework of how this is all, how we go about figuring this out and how we go about making other people, educating other folks about it and how we roll it out. I really feel like that needs to be a major focus too before we dive into this.
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah, so I'm putting in my notes like a strategy meeting, Tony, Corinne, April, myself, maybe yourself too, Kalima, if that's appropriate for creating an equity framework or like a process for the equity work.
Yes, I think that would be awesome, just so we could all kind of get everybody on the same page and have because I think a lot of times the work starts, it comes to the board, we say, that's not what we're thinking, or that's not how we wanted it to flow. And then I don't want to just, I feel like it's a disappointment to the people that put in a lot of work before that. And so if we could get all that clear understanding before they actually jump into the work.
Yeah. Yep. That's good stuff. So what I have kind of captured here, and I'm putting it in the wrong place. I apologize, Tiffany, because I have my version of this and then you all have your version. But so I accidentally put in the wrong place, but I think it still helps. So these last pieces here, like these two parts that I kind of broke up in the agenda, some of them specifically, like we didn't talk about the article, which is absolutely fine. This is a framework that I will use in your action planning process. But one of the things that you all have done is you've actually begun to create your plan. Your plan started with your statement. Obviously, your policy is part of how you're going to infuse this work. But what we want to do next is actually in our next meetings, I'm trying to blow this up is what I was really trying to do so you can see it. What we wanted to do in our next study sessions, I should say, is review, revise like your action plan, right? So I actually take some of this and start to show you how you're actually creating a plan. And I want to have you think about, again, how we're going to apply that equity statement as you move forward. So by the time we meet again, you all will have had feedback. Hopefully you have made a vote on it, but we'll decide that later. Definitely continue to go back to these priorities. And then I think I heard Kalima say, set some goals around just kind of what we're going to do. Identify whose role is what, who's going to do this work. Think about leveraging some of the current partnerships you have, because this work is hard for just the staff to do alone. It's going to require a team. You have a task force also, I don't want you to forget about. So leveraging the work of that group, because they can do some of the data dive, they can do some of the analysis, they can make recommendations to the board based on some of your key focus areas that you want to call out. Your communication, I heard that, Kalima, that's something that you want to continue to make sure we hit on, is how we're communicating. I call it a framework. So how does this look is going to be important with this type of work specifically. And I think you just need it in general. And then timelines, revisit, okay, what is this going to look like based on timelines? What's our framework and timeline for the year? And then start to look at how are we going to measure the impact of our work? So that's where the data conversation comes in. And what are those key data points? What data do we need to collect still? What data do we have? So, and again, going back to your priorities, you're all going to spend I think you do need to spend more time on those priorities, but in future study sessions, what's going to happen is you'll probably need to break those priorities up. Pick one priority out of the 4 and use your study session to unpack that. So how do you feel about next steps? And even, before we, go, do you have dates you want to talk about, or do we want to do that in like a doodle poll or something? But just wanted to ask you about, is this kind of what you see is a good next step for you? Okay. Okay. Anything I'm missing?
Do you want to send us dates that you're available for the next meeting? And I think it's just easier to work that way. And then we can just send it out to the team. It worked well last time.
Sure. Yep. I'll send that. And then I'll also send some recommendations to think about on your policy revisions as you continue that. So we'll give you those too. And then you all have these notes and all this. So feel free to do what you need to do with them. At least you have them for your minutes, however you want to, capture your minutes. And let me know. I didn't plan to be at your meeting on the 6th, but let me know. Actually, yeah, I have another meeting that night, so I can't join. But I'll try to watch it on YouTube, and then let me know if there's anything you need after the 6th in terms of your next step. But I think you all got it. I'm super excited for you. You should feel a little tired from all of this because it's hard work. But this is the work that has to be done. And I just commend you, because every board is not rolling up their sleeves like this. And you're really creating like historically a legend, right, for generations to come. And this is powerful. So I just want to, hopefully you're feeling good about your work. And I'm just honored to support and share the space with you, and thank our students, of course, for giving insight. They always give like a whole lens that we as adults sometimes just like, we totally forgot, right? So we just appreciate you, Mustafa, Luca, for joining on your Saturdays, right?
Absolutely.
Thank you. Thank you, guys.
So with that, I'll turn it back over to you, Kalima and Tony, as you close out.
No, this was great. We do have to go hop in a closed session, and just to respect folks' time. I'm just, again, thank you to everybody for showing up on Saturday. I'm really excited about the work. Turn it over to Tony.
I'm just really, really excited. I'm so excited that we're doing this. I can't even really think of that doesn't do it justice. I'm really glad we're doing this. I'm glad that every person who's here is part of it. So well done.
Awesome. Okay. So thank you, everyone. We're gonna move on to close. So
Okay.
everyone else, we can
We're
have
getting
a
kicked out.
weekend.
All right.
And
Have
don't
a
forget
great
to stop
weekend, everybody.
Take care.